most turbulent times economically that we've ever faced, and we've come through with record levels, or keeping our unemployment down, record low interest rates, all those things that are important for the economy. We've created over 200,000 jobs through stimulus measures. He came in at a very tough time, and October 2008, when the global financial crisis hit, they were very turbulent times, and I think that he's weathered a lot of that, and we were starting to get on top of things. Paid parental leave going through, the Telstra deal being signed. There was a lot of positive things starting to happen.
Still, politics can be a nasty game. Backstabbing, of course, is key in these situations. What would your message be to your colleagues as you prepare to enter that meeting today where you'll vote on the future of the Labor Party and the country?
Well, I think that, I haven't got a message for my colleagues. I know where I sit. Certainly the Prime Minister, as I said, has been very good to me, and people just have to be true to themselves. If they honestly believe that we should have a leadership change, well, they vote along those lines. But I think that at a time like this, people need to have the integrity and the courage to stick by their convictions. And I'm certainly, as I've said before, I'm no one's Gucci bag. I don't get around as somebody's handbag. I'll make my own decisions about what I think's the right thing to do, and if I'm proven today that I've backed the wrong horse, well, so be it. My main goal is to get through the morning. I'm aligned to the Prime Minister. I've made that very public, and I'll just get on with life, making sure that Tony Abbott doesn't become Prime Minister.
Damien Hale, thanks for your time.
No worries, thank you.
Some rare insights there on the doors of Parliament House from the Labor MP, Damien Hale. We'll keep you posted as we see any more Labor MPs come through these doors, David.
Ash, thank you. Damien Hale, we should point out, is the member for Solomon in the Northern Territory. He's one of the class of Kevin 07. These are the MPs who largely seem to be sticking with the Prime Minister. People who were elected as part of that Kevin 07 campaign feel a great deal of loyalty towards him. He may not have the faction bosses, but he's got people like that still in his pocket. But from what I'm hearing, it's not enough of them. The votes at the moment, out of 112 that will be present in the caucus today, Julie Gillard's backers are confident they have between 64 and 70 of them. So a clear majority, not an overwhelming majority, but a clear majority to win today. Kieran Gilbert in Canberra, the fact that you have the likes of Doug Cameron and Damien Hale out there publicly this morning defending Kevin Rudd, capable MP, Senator, but not your senior power broker telling the party publicly what they should do.
No, that's right, and most of them are keeping their cards to their chest, as you've pointed out. But the power brokers are telling us that the numbers have gone, and that Rudd at best has about a quarter, maybe a bit more, but not much more, and not enough to retain the leadership and the lodge. What is it now? About an hour, just over an hour from that caucus meeting kicking off. As we speak, there are going to start in a moment party meetings and caucus meetings all over the place. We've got to take a quick break, Dave. I'll throw back to you for now, but ongoing coverage over the next hour, and it's going to be a fascinating hour or two ahead. It is.
We are 1 hour away from the caucus showdown between Kevin Rudd and Julie Gillard. Stay with us here on Sky News for rolling coverage.
If you're a member of an industry super fund, there are very real benefits of being with ME Bank. Here's just one of them. You can now earn 6.35% per annum with ME Bank's 7-month super members term deposit. That includes bonus interest of 0.25% per annum. If you're a member of an industry super fund, ME Bank is your bank.
They certainly put a smile on my face.
In 2004, over 68,000 men and over 64,000 women died. Accidents and assaults accounted for over 5,000 and other causes over 127,000. Death happens often and can be unexpected. If it happened in your family, could they cope with up to $6,000 or more in funeral expenses? If they'd struggle, then call Insurance Line about a low-cost funeral plan. A $6,000 debt is no way to say goodbye. Cover is available up to $15,000 and pays a lump sum generally within 48 hours of receiving completed claim requirements. And all this worry can be removed from just $3.41 a week for $6,000 cover. If you're 17 to 80, you're guaranteed cover without a medical. You're covered for accidental death only in the first 12 months, full cover thereafter, and you get a 30-day money-back guarantee. For peace of mind from just a few dollars a week, call Insurance Line now on 138898. 138898. Call now.
This is Sky News, Australia's news channel.
Good morning. You are watching Sky News rolling coverage of the battle for the Lodge. In an hour from now, Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard will go head-to-head in a caucus showdown for the leadership of the Labor Party. Julia Gillard's backers are confident that she has the numbers. It won't be an overwhelming result, though, it seems. Kevin Rudd is still clinging to some support in the party, and the phone calls are continuing over the next 60 minutes before MPs assemble in the party room in Parliament House to decide on history, whether to tip out a Labor Prime Minister in his first term for the first time, or whether to, and as a result, make Julia Gillard Australia's first female Prime Minister. Or will Kevin Rudd defy the odds, struggle on as Prime Minister, but with his leadership clearly wounded just months out from an election? How did it come to this point? Sky News political reporter David Lipson looks at how the night unfolded.
It had been unusually quiet in Canberra, and by 7 o'clock last night it was clear why. The first rumblings emerged of a push for leadership change from within the Labor Party.
Sky News understands that the Victorian right, the right wing of the Victorian Labor Party, is counting the numbers for Julia Gillard.
20 minutes later, Julia Gillard, who for weeks has laughed off speculation of a challenge as absurd, headed to the PM's office. She was joined by senior ministers Wayne Swan, Lindsay Tanner and Anthony Albanese. At first, Ms Gillard's staff denied the meeting was over leadership, but as several hours dragged on, there became no doubt. The Prime Minister called a news conference to confirm he was under siege.
Earlier this evening, Julia Gillard came to see me and has requested a ballot for the leadership of the Labor Party.
Ms Gillard, who's understood to have resisted a messy challenge, had eventually thrown her hat into the ring.
Thank you. Can I confirm I will be a candidate in tomorrow's ballot, and apart from that statement, I haven't got any other statement at this time.
The architect of the spill was Victorian MP Bill Shorten, backed by other right-wing heavyweights, Senators David Feeney and Don Farrell. It's a historic move, the first time a challenge has been mounted on a Prime Minister before he served out his first term. And with the numbers on Julia Gillard's side, you may well be looking at our first female Prime Minister. David Lipson, Sky News, Canberra.
So that sets the scene. It is an hour away from the party room meeting. At Sky News chief political reporter Kieran Gilbert in our Canberra bureau. Kieran, we've heard from a couple of people backing Kevin Rudd still this morning, but you're joined now by someone who's in Julia Gillard's corner.
Yeah, Kate Lundy, a local member here in Canberra. Thank you for joining us. First of all, who are you backing?
Julia Gillard. When presented with the opportunity, Kevin Rudd called the ballot last night, and I'll certainly be putting my vote behind Julia Gillard because I think she offers us the best chance to win the next election. We're faced with a tough competition leading into it. I don't want to see work choices come back. I want to see our reform programs in health, in education, the broadband network. I want to see those things continue, and I believe most Australians do as well.
And what is it about Julia Gillard that makes her a better salesperson? Because she's been in a lot of these decisions. She was in the kitchen cabinet, one of the four key decision makers. She's got to deal with that.
Look, she does have to deal with that, but I think she has the record, the capacity, the strength and the communication skills to be able to take Labor where we need to go, to serve it up to Abbott moving into this election period. And I think she's the best qualified for the job.
And as far as you're aware, does she have the numbers this morning?
Look, as far as I know, I'm not counting myself. I know where I'm placing my vote, and I'm putting it firmly and confidently behind Julia Gillard because I think she will maximise Labor's chances for winning the next election.
And does that, part of that argument that you make, is it because she is also potentially the first female Prime Minister?
Look, for me, it's about the best person for the job. I think it's wonderful that she's female, but Julia Gillard has established her political credentials on her own terms, and the fact that she's female is, I think, terrific. But she's there because she is the best, And that's why she's going to get the support of caucus. And I think that's why she'll earn the respect of all of the Australian people.
It's been a dramatic day, or less than a day now, 12 hours or so. What's it been like to be in the caucus? It must have been quite hard to keep up with at times.
Look, really difficult. I certainly was watching the news with great interest last night and appreciate the live crosses from the media here in the gallery. These things do happen quickly. Opportunities arise. Kevin Rudd made a big call last night in taking this to a ballot. He could have stepped aside. He could have forced a no confidence. He's given me the opportunity to make a choice between him and Julia. I picked Julia because I think she's going to be the one to help us defeat the Liberals, defeat work choices and take this country forward.
What was it about Kevin Rudd's leadership that failed?
Look, I think politics is a tough business, but with such highs come such lows. And I think what we're experiencing now is a very classic dive in confidence in his leadership. I think that's manifested itself quite firmly in some policy decisions that are under much debate within the Labor Party. Climate change is one that I'm particularly passionate about, but I also want to really make sure we get re-elected. And things like the National Broadband Network, you would know I want to see that built. We can only do that if we win the next election, and I think we maximise our chances of winning with Julia Gillard as Prime Minister of Australia.
Do you think that it's his leadership style that at the end of the day cost him the job, that he didn't consult enough?
Look, it's easy to retrospectively analyse. I think we should at least wait till after the ballot, till the result's known. I don't want to pick...
That's a fair point. I should say if he loses the job.
I don't want to pick apart Kevin Rudd's leadership. I'm a proud member of this Labor government, but we have a challenge before us, a tough competition. We could lose the next election. So as a responsible member of caucus, I think I have an obligation to make sure that we put our best person forward. We need to maximise our chances, and I think most Australians will support us in this decision, and hopefully that will bring that vote back to Labor, and we can do this.
I know you've got a busy morning, you've got to get going, but just two other quick questions. You're from the hard left faction, that's Anthony Albanese's. As far as we understood, that was locking in behind Kevin Rudd, but obviously some people are splintering off and not going with their factional base, or is the hard left not behind Rudd as we had anticipated?
Well, I just don't think you can make any blanket assumptions about that. As members of caucus, we're confronted with tough decisions like this. Leadership ballots are amongst the toughest decisions we're asked to make as individual members of caucus. I make my decision based on what I think is best for the party, for Australia, and I'll stand by those decisions. So no, I don't think you can make assumptions about different groups within groups locking behind anyone.
Okay.
We've all got a tough decision ahead of us this morning.
One last question relating to the deputy. Will you back Wayne Swan as deputy?
Look, I think that when Julia Gillard was Kevin Rudd's deputy, it was an intrinsic part of the team, and I think that the team structure going forward is important, and I think the team that Julia wants behind her is the one I'll be supporting, because that offers the best chance for strength and unity.
And that's Wayne Swan?
As I understand it.
OK, Kate Lundy, appreciate it. Have a good morning.
Thank you very much.
OK, David Spears, back to you.
Well, that was interesting right at the end there, I think, in particular, Kieran. Thank you for that. Kate Lundy confirming there that her understanding is that Wayne Swan will be Julia Gillard's deputy. That is the ticket that's being sold to Labor MPs and senators heading into this caucus meeting just under an hour from now in Canberra, that it will be a Julia Gillard Wayne Swan ticket, as we've been reporting since last night. There's some confirmation there that is what MPs are expecting to vote on, that it will be the two of Kevin Rudd's most powerful lieutenants, Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan, lining up against him. The writing certainly seems to be on the wall. Ashley Gillen is outside the entrance to the House of Reps. Ash, we just heard from one senator who's voting for Julia Gillard. You've been talking to a Victorian MP who's like-minded.
Yes, Kelvin Thompson, I spoke with him. He's sick of what we've heard so much about over the last few weeks, the kitchen cabinet. He says the decision under Kevin Rudd's government have been all with the Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, Lindsay Tanner and Wayne Swan. And he said simply is sick of it. He wants more consultation and he thinks Julia Gillard can deliver that. Also walking through the doors today, we've seen Mark Dreyfus, the Liberal MP, also backing Julia Gillard. But I also spoke with the MP, Damien Hale, before. He's standing by Kevin Rudd, saying the Prime Minister saw us through the global financial crisis and he believes the party should stay with him because of that. In terms of the mood here, everyone's still a bit in shock that this happened so quickly, and members of the press here are really just astounded at the pace at which this has happened. I'm joined here by Fairfax's National Bureau Chief, Tim Lester. Tim, you've been around this building for a very long time. Have you ever seen anything like this? It's really history in the making, isn't it?
It is, although the great thing about this place is that it always can surprise you. It just has days that are truly wonderful, organic, and you don't know where they're going. Well, welcome to one of them. It's a great scene, a lot of fun, although increasingly I think this morning what we're seeing is a drift here to Julia Gillard. Certainly it seems the mood in Labor is that her position is strengthening, and I think it would now be a surprise. And what we've just seen with Kelvin Thompson, you referred to, quite bitter and strident comments, really do show us that there's no such thing as a free ride on a leadership ballot. They damage people, and they're damaging Kevin Rudd now.
We did see that story in Fairfax Press yesterday about Kevin Rudd's Chief of Staff, Alastair Jordan, looking for counting numbers early in the morning. It's something Kevin Rudd laughed off yesterday. But in terms of catalysts as to what sparked this all off yesterday, do you think that had a lot to do with it? Because we heard Julia Gillard was furious at that report.
Unquestionably, it seems to have infuriated Julia Gillard and brought her to the point where she's gone and confronted the Prime Minister at some time yesterday. And as much as we have to guess on this kind of thing, it does seem to have laid the ground for her to have made a change of heart, or at least been part of her decision-making process. Because what we were hearing all before that was that whilst there was a mood among some Labor MPs to move, Julia Gillard, their candidate, wasn't moving. She wasn't ready. Well, something changed that yesterday. Do I think it was only that? Maybe not. I think that was part of it, yes.
Tim Lester, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
Ashley, thank you. And look, you've been talking there about the comments of Kelvin Thompson because, look, for MPs, senators, on a morning like this, it's difficult to get the language right. They want to talk up their candidate, but clearly some are going to have egg on their face and going to have to serve under a leader who they've publicly not backed. But Kelvin Thompson in particular was critical of Kevin Rudd, not something Kate Lundy was willing to do, as we heard earlier. She was just talking up Julia Gillard and why a change would be good. It's one thing to do that. It's another to actually openly, publicly, on camera criticise the guy who's still there, who's still the Prime Minister. Well, Kelvin Thompson's done that. He spoke to Ashley Gillen a few minutes ago. Let's hear what he had to say.
Kelvin Thompson, thank you for your time. You're backing Julia Gillard today. Why?
I believe that we need to have leadership which is inclusive. We need to have a change of management style. For far too long, the caucus has been sent out to defend decisions with which we have had no say and which have been damaging of our credibility and personal standing. You can't be out there saying that climate change is the greatest moral challenge of our time, or that taxpayer-funded government advertising is a cancer on democracy, and then backflip on these things without damage to our personal standing and credibility. So I'm looking for a change of direction, one which gives genuine say to the members of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party and gives us a say in issues before decisions are made rather than afterwards.
And if Julia Gillard is elected, as we all expect she will be, well, what do you think her priorities should be in terms of policy changes, perhaps on the emissions trading scheme?
Well, I'd like to see less rosy talk about a big Australia and more action to protect the Australian environment and the Australian way of life. There's no doubt in my mind that climate change needs to be a top public policy priority for Australia, and that we need to have policies which are going to cut Australia's greenhouse gas emissions.
Can you believe that Kevin Rudd's downfall has been so quick? We saw him rating in a stratosphere in terms of popularity. Have you ever seen anything like this before? Are you in as much shock as everyone else seems to be?
No, I haven't, and yes, it is a surprising thing that these are a matter for the caucus. The Federal Parliamentary Labor Party hasn't yet met to vote on those things, and we'll see what the outcome of that ballot is, but there has been a substantial change in our political standing and our political fortunes in recent times, and that's come as a result of the decisions and backflips in relation to carbon trading and things like government taxpayer-funded government advertising on the resources super profits tax. So those.
Kelvin Thompson, Victorian Labor MP, talking to Ashley Gillan there. Well, it's all coming out now. This is what Labor MPs have been saying privately for quite a while now. It's all tumbling out this morning on the eve of this caucus meeting as MPs line up to knife their leader, to tear down Kevin Rudd. Only in his first term as a Labor Prime Minister, history in the making this morning, as a Labor Prime Minister is denied a second chance at an election. And Australia is on the cusp of having its first female Prime Minister. Let's go back to our studio in Canberra. Kieran Gilbert, you've got Sam Maiden from The Australian there with you.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Sam. With this event this morning, we're all expecting Gillard to win. What are the implications for election timing, Sam?
Yeah, look, I think that if Julia Gillard does emerge as Australia's Prime Minister from this party room this morning, I think we could expect the election sooner rather than later. If she does get a lift in the polls when she takes over, I think that they'd want to take advantage of that. And so it'll be very interesting to see what it does to that election timing. You know, will she, for example, come out, perhaps not immediately, obviously, but say, now I want to give voters a chance to make their decision and go to an election quickly.
Okay, so what are you hearing then, as far as the numbers are concerned, and some of the key figures in the Labor Party? Which way are they falling?
We're reporting on the Australian website this morning that it's really the hard left that is locking behind Kevin Rudd. Patricia Karvelas has a story saying that Chris Evans, the Immigration Minister, is locking behind Rudd. Anthony Albanese is locking behind Rudd. Lindsay Tanner is possibly still behind Rudd, and also some other members of the hard left. From the other side of things, it looks like Nicola Roxon, Robert McClelland are backing Gillard, and obviously we know about some of those factional leaders, other ministers, Tony Burke, Simon Crane, Brendan O'Connor, Stephen Smith, and long-time Gillard supporter Kim Carr, all locking in behind Julia Gillard. We're also reporting that Tanya Pliberzek is sticking with Kevin Rudd.
McClelland was the bellwether last time, wasn't he? He was the clinching vote.
He was the guy in the shower. He made his mind up in the
He decided in the shower. I wonder if he did it in the shower last night, Sam. One last thing. Excuse my phone here. It's been on to get text messages, but it's very rude.
That's all right.
In relation to the people behind this, a lot of, many of our viewers would have heard of Bill Shorten. Not everyone would have heard of David Feeney and Don Farrell and co. Talk us through who these people are.
Well, I think this is going to be the line of attack that the coalition will run. Who are the faceless factional leaders, the hit squad that basically went after Kevin Rudd's leadership? Bill Shorten, we know from the Beaconsfield mine disaster. He was the public face of that through the Australian Workers' Union. Mark Arbib, some people know, if you're familiar with politics, he was the kingmaker of Kevin Rudd when he challenged Kim Beazley, but I think most people wouldn't be able to identify him in a lineup. Don Farrell, South Australian Right-Wing Shoppers Union. I don't think many people would know who he is. And David Feeney, the Victorian right factional power broker, who was, of course, the bloke who got a hot blast from Kevin Rudd, an expletive-laden tirade when they had a bit of a negotiation over printing allowances, which was reported at the time that the Prime Minister used some pretty rough language with those factional leaders. Interestingly, that little moment, Don Farrell was there as well. So I don't know if the seeds of this were sown at all in this moment. I mean, they obviously believe it's just a hard assessment that Julia Gillard's the person to get them over the line at the next election.
Sam Maiden, David Spears here. I don't want to butt in. You're going to be, keeping a very close eye on what happens over the next hour and a half as we see the caucus meet inside the party room. I just want to go through what exactly is going to happen. MPs will come in, they'll sit down. Kevin Rudd will no doubt deliver a quick address to say, look, as you no doubt have heard, I'm declaring the leadership vacant. There's going to be a ballot. The Julia Gillard then says she's a candidate and the vote is held. Is that pretty much the process as you understand it? And then the whip comes out, the party whip, to tell us who the winner is.
Yeah, I mean, it could take a little bit longer than we expect, though, because don't forget we've also got to have a ballot on the deputy if Julia Gillard is successful. So there'd be a second ballot. But yes, that would be my understanding, that the leadership would be declared vacant. Both candidates would presumably have an opportunity to address their colleagues, and a vote would be taken. And in the event that Julia Gillard wins that ballot, there would then be a second ballot for the deputy. And of course, we've been hearing, and where the Australian's reporting today, that that's likely to be Wayne Swan if Julia Gillard seizes the leadership from Kevin Rudd.
There's no other candidate for deputy, as I understand it. Wayne Swan has got that one sewn up. But Sam, I want your thoughts too on Julia Gillard last night. Last night here on Sky News, Kieran and I were debating whether she should have said something publicly, perhaps a more considered statement about why she wants to end Kevin Rudd's prime ministership, why she wants to become prime minister this close to an election. Instead, we just got images of her looking incredibly worn out, stressed, harangued. The image, certainly from watching it on the screen, was that here's someone who's been pushed into this, perhaps somewhat reluctantly. Do you think last night it would have served her better to say something publicly about why she's doing this, or do you think keeping her comments and her arguments simply to on-the-phone conversations with backbenchers was the better way to go?
No, I can understand why she did it. In terms of fighting the leadership ballot, there's been a long history of people fighting out these leadership ballots in public, and it has backfired. It's upset caucus members. Let's not forget that it would be presumptuous in the sense that if she loses, she'd then be seen to be publicly disloyal to Kevin Rudd. I can understand why she did this. Right now, you know, it was 10:45 at night, and she had literally less than 12 hours to make sure that she had the support of her caucus colleagues. I can understand what you're saying from a media management point of view. The Australian people want to know what is on earth is going on and how she would govern Australia differently. But she's obviously made the call that that's a explanation she's going to offer if and when she takes over the leadership of the Labor Party.
Yeah, that's right. Sam, thank you for that. I want to bring in someone who is standing by his man, Craig Emerson, the Small Business Minister and fellow Queenslander. Craig Emerson is there, as you can see, in our Canberra studio. Craig, I'm not sure if you can hear me, but you are sticking with Kevin Rudd. Why?
Kevin Rudd led Labor to victory in 2007 after 11 and a half years in the wilderness. That's a massive achievement, and in that time we've been one of the very few countries to have been able to stay out of recession. We've delivered these 3 rounds of tax cuts on time, in full, an education tax refund. We've got rid of work choices. We've honoured, in fact, a very large number of the commitments that we made. It's a reforming government, and when you're a reforming government, of course you can fall in popularity, but I think it's important in those circumstances, when you're trying to make hard decisions, such as the resource super profits tax, that we stick together, we back in the leader. I've always actually done that, by the way.
Well,
I'm conservative about these things.
That, but
I want to back in the leader, the Prime Minister of Australia, Kevin Rudd.
Sure, but the fact is your colleagues aren't sticking with their leader. A couple of things. Do you think he can win realistically? What are we, just over half an hour away from the vote? Can he win? And B, even if he does manage to scrape over the line, can he seriously convince the Australian electorate that he has the support of his party and deserves another term? Won't the argument that he is a leader on incredibly thin ice without the support of his colleagues fatally wound him?
Well, I'm not a numbers man, I'm a policy person. I get one vote and my vote's going to Kevin Rudd, and I think that's the basis on which people should make their decisions rather than on, you know, groupings and such things, factions or whatever they might be. I'm not going to be driven purely by opinion polls. I think when you make tough decisions, that affects the standing of the leader, it affects the standing of the party, and I quite like the notion when we're down and need to improve our standing that we all come together and support the leader and improve our competitiveness at an election. And I will just say this incidentally, though, that if we are going to have a look at opinion polls, in my own state of Queensland, which everyone says is a major battleground at the coming election, Kevin is actually quite popular relative to Julia. That's no adverse reflection on Julia. I think she's been a fantastic member of the team. And I agree with Kevin on this. Julia would make a fantastic Prime Minister one day, but I believe that we should back in the Prime Minister of Australia, a first-term Labor Prime Minister, and that's what I would urge my colleagues to do, support the Prime Minister of Australia as a first-term reforming Labor Prime Minister.
All right, Craig Emerson, look, thank you very much for that, and we will hopefully talk to you after we see the result of this party room meeting in half an hour's time. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, now let's go down again outside the House of Representatives entrance where MPs have been filing through. Ashley Gillen's there and Sky News contributor Peter Van Onselen as well. You've heard MPs from both sides of this battle speaking there this morning, some in favour of Kevin Rudd, some in favour of Julia Gillard. As we've been reporting, though, Julia Gillard's number count has certainly been telling me that she has already locked in between 63 and 70 votes. There will be 112 caucus members voting today. Normally it's 115. A few aren't there, Peter Garrett included, although Peter Garrett, as I'm told, would have backed Julia Gillard were he in the meeting today, to put that on the record. But the numbers do seem to be with Julia Gillard. Is that the sense you get down there as well?
Well, yes, David, the public reaction we've seen from the MPs who have been willing to show their faces here on the doors of Parliament is that Julia Gillard will emerge as Australia's new Prime Minister after this meeting gets underway in just over half an hour's time. We're still sorting through exactly who is in which camp. Just publicly speaking this morning on the doors, we heard from Kelvin Thompson and Mark Dreyfus saying that they are backing Julia Gillard, Damien Hale, Doug Cameron, Jim Turner, also from the seat of Leichhardt in Queensland, saying they're backing Kevin Rudd, that they want to stand by him. They're sounding very loyal this morning, although not very hopeful that he will emerge as the winner. Peter Van Onselen, what are you hearing in terms of what ministers are backing Kevin Rudd still and are staying loyal?
Well, some ministers are doing that as part of the appearance of being part of the executive and therefore staying loyal to the Prime Minister. But overwhelmingly, Kevin Rudd, I don't think, has the numbers here. The interesting thing, though, for the Labor Party is they have to balance, and this is the key for them, I think, they have to balance giving Kevin Rudd enough support that he doesn't get humiliated as a result of this and therefore perhaps fly off the rails after the defeat, with giving Gillard enough support that she's got the kind of mandate that doesn't give the impression of the party being divided going forward. So the sort of numbers that David was just talking about, getting close to 70 or perhaps a little bit beyond that, are enough to give her a very clear mandate, but the hard left sticking with Kevin Rudd, I should say, gives him enough cover that he hasn't been humiliated to the point where we're talking about numbers that are so low that he may find himself in a position where he thinks that this is just very embarrassing for him. For a long time now, we have been talking to Labor backbenchers. They've been very nervous, very rattled by Kevin Rudd's plummeting polling. We've heard that he's very unpopular within the Labor caucus. Today we've been hearing people like Kelvin Thompson criticising the Kevin Rudd for his leadership style, that he's too much, he's a bit of a control freak, that he makes the decisions with his kitchen cabinet. Do you think that is one of the key areas that people want change and are looking to Julia Gillard to
Ash,
do
I'm
things
sorry,
differently?
Ash, I'm just going to interrupt you there if I can. Ashley, can I just get you to turn your phone off? We're just getting a lot of interference, I'm sorry, from the mobile, or someone's mobile there. It might not be yours. Just with the microphone there. Thanks, guys. Just while you do that, can I tell you, Mark Kenny from the Adelaide Advertisers just sent out a tweet on Twitter. Great to follow this on Twitter as well. This says that all 5 members of the South Australian left are with Julia Gillard. So that's Penny Wong, Mark Butler, Steve Georgianis, Anne McEwen and Tony Zappia, all with Julia Gillard, which is interesting, particularly Penny Wong there. We've heard about the hard left getting in behind Kevin Rudd. Well, not in South Australia. The left are behind Julia Gillard there in South Australia. All right, we're waiting to cross to our Canberra bureau, to our studio in Canberra. Let's just quickly hear the final comments there from Peter Van Onselen and Ashley Gillen.
Well, just that the situation for Kevin Rudd is that I think he's very likely to lose. They want to personalise this about him, but not so much so that it upsets him to the point where he goes feral on them in the aftermath of it. But they do need to personalise it, because the whole point about arguing that moving to Gillard is the right way to go is that Kevin Rudd had personal dissatisfaction that they needed to repair, but that this is still a good government in terms of what it has achieved. That is an important message, because if they lose the narrative that this is a good government, or that overall this is a good government, then they find themselves in a position position where the opposition are able to strike and say, well, we're only a matter of months away from a potential election and you've botched a first term, you don't deserve to be re-elected. They can't allow Kevin Rudd going out the door to be anything more than an unpopular Prime Minister going out the door, because if it is, they're in a world of pain.
All right, thank you very much for that, Peter. We'll come back to you and Ashley in a moment. Let's go back upstairs in Parliament House to our studio there, and as you can see on the screen, two of our Sky News agenda regulars. Graham Morris, who was with us last night, former Chief of Staff to John Howard, now with Graham Morris Consulting, and Bruce Hawker from the Labor-aligned lobbying group Hawker Britain. Bruce, what's going on this morning? This has been an extraordinary 12 hours or so that's seen Kevin Rudd's support evaporate. As we've been reporting, Julia Gillard's supporters say she has the numbers half an hour away from the caucus meeting to win this and become Australia's first female Prime Minister. What an amazing night and what an amazing morning.
Absolutely, David. I think it took a lot of people by surprise, myself included, that it moved as rapidly as it did. Today, I think it's just a matter of preparing for the ballot and preparing, speaking to people, looking for support. Clearly, there is going to be a ballot, and at the end of that, well, we'll just have to wait and see what happens. I think somebody once said that the only person's vote that you can really trust is the one that comes up to you and says, I'm not voting for you.
That's true.
And I think that's probably where we best should go with this.
Whoever,
it could be tight, but I think it's going to be tough.
Yeah, whoever wins, and I can understand your reluctance to call one way or the other, whoever wins, do you really think Labor can show any sense of unity? We're so close to an election. Here we have the leader and the deputy going head-to-head in a leadership contest. This is a bad look for the party, isn't it?
Well, we've seen precedent for that in the past, where the party has had tough leadership spills close to an election, and they've come together and they've won. The Labor Party has got a great capacity to unify around leadership, whether it's the incumbent or the challenger. And I don't think that's going to be the big challenge for Labor going ahead. I think if Kevin Rudd wins, then there'll be a clearing of the air around the issue. If Julia Gillard wins, then it's going to be she's going to have her own agenda, which she's going to push forward, and that'll become the story of the day.
Bruce, what about if well, obviously the Liberals are going to target Gillard, saying you've been propped up by the unions, you're a factional creation. How much of a challenge is that going to be for her to deal with, and how quickly does she have to deal with it?
Well, Julia Gillard is a popular figure in her own right. That's clear from all the polling that we keep seeing and keep having comments about. So I don't think that's a big challenge for Julia Gillard if she becomes the leader. Clearly, factions do play a big role in the Labor Party, and influences come from the unions as well. That's part of the strength, and sometimes it's part of the weakness of the Labor Party. But this is a party that survived since the 1890s with that dual base. A parliamentary base and a union base, and I think it'll continue to do that.
Let's bring Stephen Loosley into the conversation as well. He's in our city studio in Sydney. Stephen Loosley, former Labor National Secretary. Stephen, what are your thoughts this morning? This is an historic day for the Labor Party, but also for the country, to see a Prime Minister torn down, as most expectations are. What do you think will happen, and what do you make of all that's unfolding?
Well, it is a regeneration in terms of the Labor leadership. I don't think there's any doubt about that. It's an unfortunate time for the Prime Minister, but there is no question either that Federal Labor needed to address the issue, and the Deputy PM very likely to step up into the leadership as a consequence of today's caucus ballot. Will look to achieving a mandate in her own right, and I think dispensing with some of the issues that have plagued the federal government over recent weeks and months is really a priority for Julia Gillard. It's a circumstance where the first woman Prime Minister, quite rightly, the first Labor leader elected in these circumstances, but it is a question of renewal and regeneration, and I think it gives the federal Labor government an opportunity to recover some of the ground that's been lost over the last few months, and to rebuild electoral fortunes, and to rebuild a sense of momentum going into a general election campaign that's only months away, David.
So, Stephen, you're saying that this will happen and laying out the reasons why it needs to happen. What about the damage, though, to the Labor brand? I mean, Julia Gillard will not only have to wear the fact the party's split, and we've seen that this morning with MPs publicly one way and the other, but also to try and deal with these policy problems will take some fairly difficult backdowns from someone who was intimately involved in those decisions, whether it's the emissions trading scheme, whether it's the mining tax, whether it's the stimulus spending. Julia Gillard was right there at the hip of Kevin Rudd. It won't be easy for her, will it, to make these adjustments?
But Julia is a very formidable political leader. I should say, David, it gives me no joy to talk about the end of the Rudd Prime Ministership in personal terms, and full marks to the current PM for achievement, particularly his government keeping Australia out of the global recession.
Yeah, but
there's no question
full marks, surely. I mean,
the
party's deserting him. Can you really give him full marks if he's lost the support of his party?
For full marks on achievement during his administration. I have no hesitation in saying that.
Where's it gone
but
wrong?
I think a combination of factors, mistiming on the ETS, circumstances on border protection, the perceptions of the policy being flawed caused Labor to hemorrhage votes off on its right, as with the ETS causing Labor to hemorrhage votes off on its left. Couple that with the continuing drama, and underline the continuing drama over the debate on the resource rent tax, on the super profits tax, which has gone on far too long in the estimation of the caucus as well as the general electorate. I think they're the issues that have really caused the government's support to erode quite dramatically. Now, a new leader looking at things afresh, very capable in terms of dealing with the issues. I think a different perspective is afforded the government by the electorate, and a different perspective is available to the government in terms of dealing with the issues, hence the idea of renewal and regeneration. And politics is very much harder and very much faster. It's a much more rapid art than ever we've seen. We had a circumstance a few years ago with the federal Labor leadership, for example, with Simon Crean, where the party grew convinced, unfortunately, Simon's a particularly hard worker, particularly diligent and dedicated, but the party formed a view Labor could not win with Simon, so there was a change. Now, when that conclusion is reached, regardless of the personalities, it's got to be the interests of the government here and getting these issues right in the interests of the country.
Well, I know, Stephen Loosley, it's a difficult day for you. I know you don't speak lightly against the guy who's still sitting there in the leadership, but I think your analysis there is quite accurate about what's gone wrong for Kevin Rudd and why there is this mood for change. I want to bring in Graham Morris, who is in our Canberra studio. Graham, you were with us last night, and I think before we wrapped up very late in the evening, you were suggesting that it would be preferable for Labor to have someone convince Kevin Rudd in the meeting this morning to simply acknowledge that he doesn't have the numbers and step aside without the need for a vote. It won't happen, though, and my understanding is that he is going to fight this. He doesn't have the numbers according to the number counters, but the figures that he does have aren't humiliating. He does have significant support there amongst the so-called Kevin 07 brigade, those who came into Parliament in 2007 under the Kevin 07 election banner. Also, some sections of the left, like Doug Cameron, he's got Anthony Albanese, Tanya Plibersek. But what do you think? I mean, if he's not going to simply say, I'm getting out of the way and Julia Gillard's taking over, does this at least give Julia Gillard some more legitimacy than she otherwise would have? Actually having a count, having a ballot, does that give her more authority as Labor leader?
Well, we start from the premise that it's a brutal and ruthless morning. And I think just listening to a lot of Labor people this morning in the cafes and whatnot in Parliament House, they were essentially hoping that someone like Therese Rain over the Cocoa Pops this morning would have said to the PM, look, for the good of the party and for your own sake, maybe don't put the party through this. But it does look as though the Prime Minister is going to force a vote. He's quite entitled to. He will do reasonably well, but not well enough. But I still think that a lot of Labor people were hoping that he would give up, walk out the door, everyone will get up and cheer. He goes with grace, he goes with style, but at the moment it looks as if they're going to have to kick him out of the door. The other thing, David, I think that was lost last night, and it occurred to me this morning, is the enormous power in all of this behind the scenes of the crusading Abbott. You know, Tony Abbott has essentially forced the Labor Party to knock off a winning Prime Minister because they don't think he could handle Tony Abbott. A most extraordinary political turnaround.
I think that's a good point. I mean, Kevin Rudd's someone who's gone through 3 Liberal leaders, John Howard, Brendan Nelson, Malcolm Turnbull, but it's Tony Abbott that's really brought him unstuck, along with his own failings, of course, and we've heard those explained throughout the morning. But Tony Abbott, I think you're right, does have to wear some of the credit here for inflicting this damage, particularly over the emissions trading scheme. What you're seeing now is a live shot outside the caucus meeting. Hopefully our camera won't be whisked away by security as it was last night, but this is a live shot outside the caucus meeting, which will begin in about 20 minutes from now. So you will see Labor MPs and senators starting to file into the party room meeting over the next 20 minutes. Some with heavy hearts, but clearly some with a great deal of anticipation and excitement about this change in leadership, which is expected and is expected to deliver Australia its first female Prime Minister. Graham, stay with us. I want to go back down to Peter Van Onselen and Ashley Gillard, who are outside the House of Reps, still where MPs have been arriving for work this morning. As you saw on that shot, they're about to go into the party room, into the caucus meeting, where it's expected Julia Gillard will win the leadership. But just picking up on Graham's point there, Peter and Ashley, Tony Abbott, how much credit should he be taking for these events this morning?
Well, I think a great deal of credit, but he needs to be careful that that credit doesn't turn into him then becoming the victim of a leadership change on the Labor side. Tony Abbott has certainly been the person who, by changing the Liberal policy on the emissions trading scheme, rattled Kevin Rudd. On top of that, he's also the person who has then, in his dogged style, managed to rattle Rudd further. But the difference, though, is that whilst Rudd's dissatisfaction rating has been rising since Abbott has been leader, Abbott's dissatisfaction rating has also been rising. Now, that tells me that the voting public have listened to what he's had to say about the Prime Minister, but at the same time don't like that style of negative politics. The risk for Abbott, after taking the credit, as he has a right to, is that on the back of a leadership change to Julia Gillard, he then looks like the bad guy and Gillard looks like the fresh new face, the first female Prime Minister, a person that has put Labor's leadership woes behind it and then goes into an election possibly even with a honeymoon period. That's the danger for Tony Abbott, and he will need to think very long and hard about what kind of approach he takes to Gillard. Does he stay negative on her and risk looking shrill, or does he decide to try to start releasing policies and open himself up to an approach that is quite different to what he's been doing over the last few weeks and months?
And I guess a lot depends on how Kevin Rudd plays it over the next 24, 48 hours, whether or not he echoes Tony Abbott's message that this is a coup that has been orchestrated by faceless factional leaders. It's something that we heard Kevin Rudd talking along those lines last night. We know the message from the Abbott camp this morning is that, look, even if they change leader, it's the same horse, different jockey. They're certainly linking Julia Gillard in with Kevin Rudd as one of the key decision makers and one of the key people behind a lot of the sort of failed policies that we have seen come from this government.
I think that's right.
Sorry to interrupt you there, guys. Dave? I know Bruce Hawker's got to go in a tick, but I want to get a final comment from him before the caucus meeting starts. Bruce, hopefully we'll talk to you after the event. But look, what are your final thoughts? We're about 15 minutes away from this historic caucus meeting where Kevin Rudd's expected to be dumped in favour of Julia Gillard. What do you think?
Well, a couple of things. One, look, I take issue with the suggestion that Tony Abbott is responsible for the problems that Labor's got at the moment. You know, he's done a job as an opposition leader, but as Peter Van Onselen points out, his vote has continued to drop in the opinion polls. So I don't think there's great comfort that the Liberals can take there. And if there is a change of leadership and Julia does take us into a new circuit, then I think perhaps if they have been pushing hard against Kevin Rudd, they might have shot themselves in the foot, because she could well be a new broom that they're going to go in there with some new policies on. So we'll have to wait and see how that all pans out. I'm not going to preempt the outcome of the ballot, but I'd say this: whatever comes out of the ballot today, Kevin Rudd, if he goes on as Prime Minister or retires as Prime Minister, will be recognised sooner or later as the person that took Australia through the worst financial crisis in 3/4 of a century, and got us out with 5.2% unemployment, the envy of the world, and no recession. And I think that's a fantastic thing to be able to point to, whether he continues to be Prime Minister or not.
All right, Bruce Hawker, look, thank you for joining us. I know a difficult day for all Labor, those involved in the Labor movement this morning. We'll talk to you a bit later on. These are the live shots outside the caucus meeting. As you can see, some MPs starting to arrive there. There have been some emotions too amongst Labor MPs this morning. Not an easy day for many of them, but smiles, as you can see on the faces of a Liberal MP up the back there. Of course, they're rubbing their hands together in glee, and being in the building, of course, today is an exciting place to be. Kieran Gilbert in our Canberra studio. We're about 15 minutes away from this caucus meeting starting, where the vote will be held. Kevin Rudd v Julia Gillard. What's the latest you're hearing?
Well, the latest is pretty much as we've been reporting for the last couple of hours, Dave, and that is that Kevin Rudd only has just over 1/4 of the vote in caucus, according to the number crunches that we're hearing from this morning. That means an emphatic victory for Julia Gillard. We've seen it's been messy this morning, no question about it, on the Labor side of politics. I suppose a leadership challenge is never easy, but you've had MPs from the Labor caucus here, sitting here this morning, arriving here at Parliament, espousing the virtues of Julia Gillard as opposed to Kevin Rudd. It is damaging, but those behind this push will be hoping that the short-term damage will be outweighed by the circuit breaker that the first female Prime Minister, if she does succeed today, that historic development will achieve, and that will create a honeymoon and give the Labor Party some air, finally, after what's been a disastrous few weeks and months. And I think Stephen Loosley nailed it earlier when he sort of articulated just where things have gone wrong in policy terms. And more broadly, in terms of the government style, it hasn't consulted enough. And unfortunately, Kevin Rudd didn't have a lot of goodwill to begin with. Within the caucus, his support was a mile wide and an inch deep, and it's pretty much crumbled over the last 12 to 16 hours. Yeah, well, let's get back to Stephen Loosley, because I know he's got to get going as well. Stephen Loosley, you laid out where the problems are. One of the big concerns, I hear certainly from Labor MPs, is this issue of consultation, that Kevin Rudd didn't consult enough beyond that inner circle, that he didn't involve all of Cabinet, let alone all of the Ministry or the caucus, in key decisions. Is that a fair criticism?
Part of it is fair, part of it is unfair, David, in this sense. Given the emergency of the global financial meltdown, the PM and the Treasurer, along with the Deputy PM and the Finance Minister, often had to act very quickly in a matter of hours. So the notion of a kitchen cabinet of Messrs Rudd, Swan and Tanner, along with the Deputy PM, with Julia, had to act very quickly. Now that circumstance meant there were a number of decisions taken. Overwhelmingly, they were very sound decisions and kept the country out of recession. That form of decision making isn't always appropriate. And to an extent, the caucus probably afforded the PM a little bit too much authority in terms of choosing his own ministry and so on and so forth. So there was a gap which developed between decision making within the PM's inner circle, and overwhelmingly the decisions I think taken were in the country's interest, but there was something of a gap. that developed, and that led to tensions over time. I want to take up a point, though, that someone said there was a Liberal MP rubbing his hands with glee in the background. That ought to be the last thing that the Liberals are doing this morning. If you look at the history of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, when we changed leaders, when we changed Hayden for Hawke or Hawke for Keating, or when Kevin Rudd steps up to the leadership prior to the 2007 election, Labor wins. Federal Labor wins because there's a new person coming into the job. In each of those cases, a superb campaigner, just like Julia Gillard, who's likely to win this caucus ballot this morning. And I would have thought the Liberals will go backwards as a consequence of the change. The country will welcome this. And Julia, as the first woman Prime Minister in particular, will receive a great deal of attention, a lot of it favourable and positive, given her undoubted capacity demonstrated to date. She's shown real resilience in her portfolios and achieved real success in both the IR side of things, labour relations, and in terms of education, David. So for any Liberal MP thinking that this is an advance on their electoral interests, I think they're going to be disabused of that notion very quickly.
Well, Stephen, I think that's a good point as well. You're looking at the live picture there on your screen outside the caucus meeting that's about to start. Bob Ellis there, of course, Labor historian and author, walking through. Everyone wanting to be part of this moment, it seems, where history will be unfolding in about 10 minutes from now. The caucus meeting due to begin. Labor MPs starting to file in. I'm hearing that there is some pressure on Kevin Rudd at this 11th hour to pull out of the contest, to step down, to step aside, so that there is no blood on the floor, there is no show of hands, and it's a seamless transition. However, I don't expect that will happen. I think Kevin Rudd's language last night, and just from what we know of Kevin Rudd, it wouldn't be his style, I think, to simply bow out of this. He's fought very hard to get that job as Prime Minister. No one lets it go lightly. Bob Hawke didn't, John Howard didn't, and Kevin Rudd won't. He will go down fighting. But the ballot still has to be held, and we shouldn't get ahead of ourselves. While the numbers counters are saying that Julia Gillard does have a clear majority in their view, it's another thing to deliver that. We'll know in the next half hour or so whether that has been delivered, but the expectations are that she will become Australia's first female Prime Minister as a result of this party room ballot that's about to happen. So do stay with us here on Sky News. We are going to stay right on this. Tanya Plibersek and Jenny Macklin, two key figures of the left there entering the room, as you can see. Jenny Macklin, a former deputy leader, a key figure in the Victorian left, and Tanya Plibersek in the New South Wales left. Tanya Plibersek, we understand, is sticking with Kevin Rudd. I should point out that despite some earlier reports, Chris Evans, the Immigration Minister, is not. He, as we understand, is with Julia Gillard. Kieran Gilbert, what's the latest on the numbers that you're hearing with about 9 minutes to go?
David, I've just had a message from a member of the caucus who tells me, this is a member of the Right faction in New South Wales, that Julia Gillard's numbers look now around 74 of the 112 votes. As you suggested, there might be a bit of pressure on Kevin Rudd to vacate the field this morning, to make it an easy transition, but as you say, it's unlikely given the language from him last night. But it looks like, according to the numbers that we're seeing this morning and hearing before the final vote, 74 to Gillard, and potentially more coming across is the message that I've just received from one of those heading into the caucus right now.
Yes, the way it works, of course, is MPs want to be, if they're perhaps undecided, they want to be on the winning side. They don't want to be the ones voting for the loser, and all that means they want to be with the winner. So any undecided at this late stage, if they can be convinced that Julia Gillard has this in the bag, perhaps they will be swung that way as well. There have been, of course, some heavy hearts amongst Labor MPs about seeing Kevin Rudd torn down in his first term. Yes, he might be having some problems in the polls and might be unpopular amongst some of his colleagues, but tearing down a Prime Minister is not a thing done lightly. Julia Irwin, I want to play you some comments from her this morning arriving at Parliament. Have a look at the emotion on her face this morning.
It is indeed a very, very sad day for the Australian Labor Party. I've been a member of the movement for 43 years. I've been a member of this Parliament for 12 years, and it's been indeed an honour. But I find it very hard that today, and I do apologise, I think my female hormones are going to start to play up. It's going to be very hard when we go into that caucus, and to see the caucus put the knife into the back of a Labor Prime Minister in his first term. And my comment to you today, I think that'll answer your question, who I will be supporting. But I would also like to just send another message, that Mark Arbib will not deliver the whole of the New South Wales right to Julia Gillard today. He has got a lot to answer for the damage that he has done to the New South Wales Labor.
All right, so the finger pointing has already begun there. Julia Irwin really blaming Mark Arbib for what's happened here and pointing the finger directly at him. You're seeing journalists milling around there and MPs starting to file in. I think that's the back of Doug Cameron up the front there. He's one standing by Kevin Rudd. I should point out that, as I was saying earlier, Tanya Plibersek is with Kevin Rudd. That is not the case, I'm told, that she is not voting for Kevin Rudd. So that the numbers are starting to settle a bit more. It's becoming clearer. Stephen Loosely, I know you've got to go shortly, so let's just get some final comments from you. What happens in these final minutes? Is there going to be pressure on Kevin Rudd not to contest, to have a seamless transition?
Well, that was occurring last night, and I have no doubt that that suggestion has been made again this morning. I think the PM was constructing his own narrative last night, though, and his clear preference was to have a ballot contested. Now, in the event that he were to lose that ballot, he's well aware of how the story will be written. Bob Hawke chose the same exit as Prime Minister, and he was beaten in a caucus ballot by Paul Keating. So I would have thought that it's unlikely that the PM simply resigns from the leadership and departs. I think his clear preference was to go to a ballot this morning, and that's his entitlement to see the views of the caucus tested. Beyond that, if the assessments are accurate, and I believe they are, and Julia Gillard steps up into the leadership, as I've said before, David, I think it's a renewal, a regeneration for federal Labor, and the opportunity to deal with some of these vexed policy questions and get a very clear focus on the general election, and to build some momentum going forward. And I think as a consequence of this, given the experience of the federal Labor Party when the Hawke leadership arrived, when the Keating leadership arrived, and indeed when the Rudd leadership arrived, federal Labor will emerge far stronger from this than people realise just now.
All right, Stephen Loosely, thank you very much for those comments, that input this morning. I know you have to go, but hopefully we'll talk to you later in the day.
Thanks,
this
David,
is going to be an historic day for the Labor Party and for Australia. Will Kevin Rudd survive, or will Julia Gillard become Australia's first female Prime Minister, but along the way becoming the one who tore down a Labor Prime Minister in their first term for the first time? Outside Parliament House this morning, Ashley Gillen and Peter Van Onselen, we're just minutes away, and we're watching the pictures here of Labor MPs filing into this caucus meeting. Your thoughts, what are you hearing? The pressure, as Stephen was saying, is coming on to Kevin Rudd to make a seamless transition here. But as I was saying earlier, I don't think that's going to happen. He's going to fight to the end for this.
After watching Kevin Rudd's news conference last night, David, he was defiant. There's no way, I would think, from the words that he said last night and even his body language, that he will be stepping down at the 11th hour this morning. Here on the doors of Parliament, we've been seeing impassioned pleas from Labor MPs backing both Gillard and Rudd this morning. Those in Kevin Rudd's camp today have really been very critical of their colleagues and the factional leaders, saying they've been stabbing Kevin Rudd in the back.
Now, Ashley, sorry to interrupt you. Kevin Rudd's just with a band of supporters behind him, and I know we're looking at the backs of their heads, but these are the Kevin 07 largely brigade, the MPs who came into Parliament at the last election. flanking him as he goes in. He had a smile on his face, looking upbeat, looking as confident as he can heading into this caucus meeting. Now other journalists and staff are starting to move away from that caucus room. Kevin Rudd did look upbeat. Look, he normally does have a smile on his face when he's in front of a camera. A lot of people crowding in front of the camera there now. We'll try and get a better shot there. But Kevin Rudd now in that meeting, no doubt he will be kicking things off with perhaps a presentation to his colleagues as to why he should stay as leader. You're also now looking at Simon Crean, former leader, Victorian right, John Murphy with him there as well, Bernie Ripoll, Lindsay Tanner, the finance minister, whose position in this has been a little unclear, but now here's the ticket, Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan, hoping to become the new leader and deputy of the Labor Party, and big smiles from these two power brokers in the Labor Party who are lining up to take the mantle from Kevin Rudd. They won't say anything to the journalists there. They'll march straight in, keeping upbeat as well. Julia Gillard looking far more relaxed and confident than she was last night, where she was just so stressed after those hours of talks with Kevin Rudd, having made this decision to challenge. Now she's marching in there confident that she has the numbers, and with Wayne Swan on her shoulder. As we've been reporting since last night, he is the only candidate for deputy in this, so it is expected that it will emerge a Julia Gillard leader, Wayne Swan as deputy. That keeps the left-right balance in place. It also keeps the state balance in place. New South Wales might be a bit miffed, but a Victorian leader and Queensland deputy will be an important balance for Labor to have, particularly as they deal with some of these challenges, particularly on the mining tax, for example. How they're going to extract themselves from that particular issue is yet to be seen. We haven't heard what Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan propose to do to get themselves out of that mess, or how they intend to deal with the challenges of asylum seekers and climate change, the policy problems there for Labor. Peter Van Onselen and Ashley, sorry to interrupt you there, but we just had the key arrivals at this caucus meeting, which is about to get underway.
Well, David, I know that, Peter, you've been getting text messages galore this morning. What are you hearing about the numbers?
I'm hearing that there's a conservative estimate of 70 for the Labor Party and for Julia Gillard, I should say. So Kieran's figure is probably more accurate in that they will want there to be a bit more of a rush at this late stage to build on that 70. But it's clear that given that she only needs 60 or even a tad under that votes in order to win this ballot, she appears to be winning it. And I think it almost becomes time, maybe a little bit early, but it becomes time to start the post-mortem. What happens with a Julia Gillard prime ministership? Does she change policy scripts? Does she change personalities in the team? It's a very late stage in an election contest to be shifting ministers, but she does have power brokers that may expect promotion. I suspect that sort of thing is more likely after an election win rather than at this late stage ahead of an election, but who knows?
My understanding is that there has not been a particular pitch on the policy front, not that I've heard anyway, to MPs from the Julia Gillard camp. It is unknown what she'll do on the mining tax. One of those really doing the numbers and pushing her cause that I spoke to was unsure exactly what can be done on the mining tax. That, asylum seekers, climate change, we don't know. The pitch has been that she will be a more consultative leader, that she can turn Labor's fortunes around in the polls, and she can hold on to government for them. Kieran Gilbert, these are the big unknowns about Julia Gillard as a leader. What will she do on the policy front? She has been a pivotal part of all of these decisions that have got Labor into this mess. Now she's going to have to address the caucus on why she wants the leadership. Perhaps she'll have to tackle some of these answers in this caucus meeting.
Yeah, David, I think she will. And you only get one first impression as a leader. And I think what we will see is as early as today, if she is successful as we're expecting, according to the numbers that we're hearing in the Labor caucus, that she will outline a strategy on the mining tax, on climate change, that she won't come in with any sort of vagaries around those areas. As I say, you get one chance for a first impression. I think she will want to make a good first impression. I mean, they're all saying that those behind this push are suggesting that a Gillard leadership will enable the Labor Party to get some air and have the electorate listen to them once again. Well, if they do, they've got to fix the problems, the policy problems that have beset them in recent times. Of course, emissions trading and the mining tax are two of the big ones, but some other ones as well. Border protection. How she does that is going to be fascinating, particularly given the internal tensions and difficulties that the Labor Party always faces on that issue of border security.
let's go to David Lipson. He's, you can see on the screen there the gaggle of journalists being herded there by security into a particular part of the corridor. They're not allowed, of course, to get too close to the meeting. I can see, though, in the background some staff members, one of Julia Gillard's, her press secretary, Russell, up the back there. But these are journalists in the front of the screen here who are kept in one particular part of the corridor there. David Lipson's amongst them. David, paint the picture for us.
Well, David, it's quite an extraordinary scene here just outside the party room. Pretty much the entire press gallery of Parliament House is gathered here, all very excited about the coming result. Dozens of cameras and lights and everything flashing as various MPs and ministers went in. It was interesting to note that Julia Gillard went in shoulder to shoulder with Wayne Swan. There was speculation indeed this morning that Wayne Swan would end up her deputy if she is, as expected, voted the next Prime Minister of Australia in the caucus there. That speculation, in a way, confirmed by her walking in with Wayne Swan. Different groups of people or MPs and ministers came in dribs and drabs throughout the past half hour or so. Basically, you saw Nicola Roxon, Mark Dreyfus and Stephen Conroy walk in together. You saw just shortly before Julia Gillard, you saw Lindsay Tanner walk in there as well. So a very heightened sense of anticipation here, waiting for the results as soon as we can.
David Lipson, thank you. Let's see, we might actually try and just have a look again at a replay. Here it is, of some of the people and who they're with. So Simon Crean, John Murphy, Lindsay Tanner and Bernie Ripoll. That's an interesting mix there. You've got Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland and a Victorian as well. Lindsay Tanner in this has been interesting, but then behind them, Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan, a smile on both their faces, but enormous weight on their shoulders, and they know it. They are about to tear down a Prime Minister in his first term, but Julia Gillard clearly believes this has to happen. If Labor's to have any chance at the election, she needs to do this. But having Wayne Swan as her deputy is very important in all of this. He has been Treasurer, of course, throughout this global financial crisis. Economic management is a key plank of Labor's story at this election. She needs that stability. She needs Wayne Swan there to make this a credible challenge. Kevin Rudd, well, we didn't get the cleanest shot of him given where our cameras are kept to in all of this, but you saw the flick of the hair and a smile there from Kevin Rudd. And his supporters are mostly junior backbenchers behind him. Some others there from the left, Tanya Plibersek and Jenny Macklin, as they filed in. A difficult day for a lot of Labor MPs, and particularly those who worked so closely with Kevin Rudd. Joel Fitzgibbon, the one minister who was dumped from the Rudd cabinet as Defence Minister for issues relating to a conflict of interest, and other MPs also arriving earlier. Kieran Gilbert, I said Lindsay Tanner's been an interesting figure in this. I've not been able to get a very clear read on exactly which way he's gone, but he walked in there with Simon Crean, John Murphy and Bernie Ripoll right in front of Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan. You were telling us earlier in the day, explaining that the history here, that Lindsay Tanner, for factional and state-based reasons, has never been all that close to Julia Gillard. But what did you make of that? The fact that he was walking in just ahead of her this morning, perhaps had come from a meeting with her and Wayne Swan this morning. Is he on side with Julia Gillard in this?
Well, potentially. I haven't had no confirmation on Tanner. What we do know is last night he was at one of the suburban restaurants in Kingston having a relaxed dinner, so he wasn't in the Prime Minister's office with the likes of Faulkner, Albanese, Swan and co. So that's a bit of an enigma, the way that Tanner will fall in this. I've just got to point out, David, and I think it was an extraordinary piece of vision that Swan and Gillard walking down towards the caucus. If we can just take our minds back 4 years to December 2006, they could not have been more fierce rivals at that leadership ballot. And in fact, intense animosity. In government, they've become quite close, as I understand it. And as we've seen, what that has resulted in now, you've got that vision. It is just extraordinary. When you think back 4 years, they were intense rivals. Animosity was powerful between them. Now they're a joint ticket.
It is a very good point. This is politics in the raw, isn't it? Here, as you rightly point out, have two people who were in diametrically opposed camps on the leadership just 4 years ago, now shoulder to shoulder as the ticket to bring down Kevin Rudd. I think this story about how this has all come together, we won't know for some time, and certainly people that I've been speaking to, while keeping us up to date on the numbers, how they sit, what's happening. How this has all happened is going to be a fascinating story to learn in the future. We just don't know the full details of the manoeuvring of people like Wayne Swan and Julia Gillard, the two key players in this. Easy to say it's the factional power brokers who pushed them into this, who made this all happen. But in the end, those two key figures are pivotal to all of this. This wouldn't happen without their decision, Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan, to do this. Kieran, in the end, if they had not put their hands up to lead this push, Kevin Rudd could have survived. But as things stand at the moment, with the weight of those two behind this push, he's gone.
You know, David, the Swan involvement in this is, I think, fascinating. What I'm hearing is that he anguished over this, that he took a lot of soundings in recent days, and then when you look at it, it was fairly pivotal, his decision and the right of Queensland to move in and make this sort of a nationwide decision by the right faction to back Gillard. But as I understand it, he anguished over it, made a lot of calls. He has been working closely with Kevin Rudd and Julia Gillard, and he believes that a decisive move needed to be made in order to essentially give them any chance at the federal election within the next couple of months, possibly even weeks.
I know you're sitting there with Graham Morris as well. Graham, the process that's going on inside the caucus meeting now is that Kevin Rudd will be explaining that he's throwing open the leadership for a contest. He will presumably be contesting, as will Julia Gillard. MPs then take a vote on that. The deputy's position, it seems, will be uncontested. We haven't heard that anyone apart from Wayne Swan is going for the deputy's job. But just reflecting on the role of Wayne Swan in this, confirmation with those images that he is the deputy candidate for Julia Gillard, the significance of that, the importance for Julia Gillard to have Wayne Swan there as her deputy?
Yeah, it's a strong ticket, and it's a problem that the Prime Minister sort of has as he goes in. You know, who is his running mate? Who can draw votes off Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan? Well, that person doesn't exist. And I think, yeah, Swan is important, but what is interesting is that Swan is also a Nambour boy, as is the Prime Minister. And here we are, two local Queenslanders have turned on each other. It is always sad to see a leader knocked off. And it does look as if we're going to have the trade union's queen knock off the people's choice.
It seems, David, that Mr. Rudd's, Kevin Rudd's own behaviour has played a part in this, in the sense that he's probably pushed the two of them together in some respects, that he was overseas a fair bit, that the two of them worked closely together in his absence, and ironically have forged a bit of a friendship upon which this leadership ticket has now been launched today.
Now, I think, Graham, your point, though, about Wayne Swan and Kevin Rudd, both Nambour boys, they haven't always been the best of mates, though, have they? There was a détente, perhaps, but a closeness, I think, between them in working through the global financial crisis. Since he became Treasurer, the two of them have, and with the Prime Minister, worked closely together. But before that, there were big differences over the leadership. The two had a frosty relationship, as we understand it, for quite some time. This is clearly going to put things back on ice again, you would imagine.
Yeah, that's right. And look, it's been one of the problems with the PM all along. We've all known that while ever tactically he could stay in front in the polls, he was going to do all right. But when things got sticky, there was absolutely no base. There was no state, no base, no factional support, nobody, no mates he could rely on. And when you get to the stage where your staff are doing your numbers, you know you're in awful trouble. The lieutenants let him down, and they should have been out there all week. The only bloke who put his hand up to go into bat all week was Lindsay Tanner.
Well, I think Wayne Swan last week and the week before was the one out there really running the defence for Kevin Rudd in a lot of the media interviews. We spoke to him here on Sky News, and I know he was around the place really leading the charge for Kevin Rudd and defending him. So the irony is that even he wouldn't stick with Kevin Rudd in the end and has opted to run as deputy for Julia Gillard. I guess this is the nature of politics, though. Pragmatism rules. If you're just joining us, you're watching a live shot there outside the caucus meeting that is underway in Canberra. You're looking at a shot there in the corridors of Parliament House. Labor MPs have been meeting for the past 10 or 12 minutes to decide on the leadership and decide on the Prime Ministership of the country. Will Kevin Rudd survive against the odds, or will Julia Gillard, as expected, become Australia's first female Prime Minister? Our sources are saying that she will get around 70, perhaps even as many as 74 of the 112 caucus votes. That would be a strong victory, giving Kevin Rudd enough votes there not to be completely humiliated, but he certainly has been under pressure to stand aside and just allow a seamless transition without an actual leadership vote. It's expected he won't do that, though, that he will fight to the end to hold on to the job and certainly use, and has been using overnight, the authority of the office of Prime Minister to pressure or at least to urge MPs to stick with him. But in the end, it's been a lot of factional leaders from New South Wales, Victoria, Western Australia, and even some in Queensland who have been running the numbers for Julia Gillard and testing support and finding it there in spades. Kieran Gilbert, looking through the list of who's with who, most of the ministry is with Julia Gillard. There are some backbenchers and a couple of ministers, Craig Emerson, who we spoke to earlier this morning, Anthony Albanese, who are sticking with Kevin Rudd. But most of the ministry has gone to Julia Gillard. That, of course, is very influential on the backbench, and it seems most of the backbench has gone with her as well, except for those handful of Kevin 07 newly elected MPs at the last election, sticking with the guy who got them there.
As of the 112 votes in the caucus, we're hearing, as we reported earlier, 74, possibly even more. With more coming over was the message that I received from a Labor MP as they were heading in. That was a member of the New South Wales Right. I just received a message as well from one Labor insider who told me that in relation to Wayne and Julia's relationship, as he describes it, at the budget time, the centre and authority of the government had notably shifted to Gillard and Swan, especially on policy matters. So within the government, there was a palpable sense that the centre of gravity, the centre of authority, had shifted around budget time to those two people. So there is a sense that Rudd's management style had alienated him, and that these two, in the absence of Kevin Rudd, had forged somewhat of an alliance, and we've seen the effects of that today, David.
And Peter Van Onselen is there now upstairs here with Kieran in the studio. Peter, the meeting's been underway for about 15 minutes now. We're waiting to hear some sort of word. The vote will probably be underway now. The two leaders have probably both had their say by now. Do you think Julia Gillard will have to explain to MPs some of these policy questions, conundrums? What's she going to do? How's she going to get them out of this trouble?
I think she will have to do that, and then obviously she'll have to come out publicly and explain it to us. There's a real paradox at play here, because the forces that have backed her in are largely the right nationally. Now, the right nationally, and large elements of it, were advocating Kevin Rudd pulling out of the emissions trading scheme, it has been reported. So does she follow them on that and stick with that, or does she go what might be her more natural tendencies as a left-winger to try to bring it back, as well as the electoral imperative of bringing it back? That's one question. There are also questions about the mining tax. Again, there's strong pressure from the right, as I understand it, to try to get a deal done sooner rather than later and satisfy the mining industry. However, again, her as a left-winger may see a lot of virtue in the nature of this tax as a redistributive measure. So I think that there is a paradox in who supports her being the right of the party and what they might want out of policy to what she is philosophically and ideologically as a traditional left-winger in the party.
I think the bigger policy challenge, though, is really going to be asylum seekers. Yes, the mining tax at the moment is the red-hot issue. It's dominating the media airwaves. It's a difficult one for Labor. But you talk to Labor MPs from different states, and they all say their biggest worry is asylum seekers. Boats keep arriving. They know that in the lead up to the election, we could see more and more boats arriving, this becoming an even worse issue for Labor. And for Julia Gillard, who is, of course, of the left, a former shadow immigration minister, but under pressure, you would think, from the right, who've got her into this position as leader, if she emerges as leader, pushing for perhaps a tougher line. Graham Morris, I want to ask you this question. Do you think... Do we have Graham? No, he's not there, I'm sorry. Peter, then, this is going to be a tricky one. How does she find a position on this that's A, different to Kevin Rudd, and B, settles the real fears of Labor MPs on this issue?
It's a very difficult policy conundrum for her. There is a lot of want in elements of the Labor Party for compassion on this issue, but marginal seat MPs and most of the right that are backing her in want a tough stance on asylum seekers. But then you have someone like Paul Howes, who is one of the key power brokers here, who shifted the Australian Workers' Union in behind her, and he is one of Labor's most outspoken critics of a tough asylum seeker policy. So he's not going to be too happy if she looks to toughen up on that front, although he will no doubt play ball and be on message in an election year so close to an election. But the asylum seekers question, I tend to think she probably has to be seen to toughen it up, but can she somehow get a balance there that includes a compassionate approach at the same time? The moratorium that they had on Sri Lankan and Afghan asylum seekers has turned into an absolute debacle as an attempt of becoming a tougher approach. Can they find another one that has at least an aura of compassion that satisfies some of the traditional Labor base, or at least left-wing Labor base? Or do they just decide that a low primary vote is inevitable because of some of the divisive issues at the moment? We will hope beyond hope that Green preferences come back to us and work to shore up the centre. That is what key power brokers like Mark Arbib and so forth certainly want her to do.
Yeah, I think this is a really vexing issue for Julia Gillard, and credibility is you know, a big factor here as well, because this is what politicians really trade on. It's their currency, is how much they can be trusted, and for a figure of the left to suddenly adopt a tougher position on asylum seekers, I think will smack of hypocrisy, and people won't believe it. But to go any further to the left on asylum seekers, to soften the policy, well, that's going to really upset a lot of those Labor MPs who are very nervous about this in marginal seats in Western Sydney, in Western Australia and Queensland as well. Graham Morris, there are no easy answers here on asylum seekers, but what's your free advice for Julia Gillard on how she handles this particular challenge?
Well, she's got to come up with change. Otherwise, the whole point of today is gone. You know, today, if I were the opposition, I'd be saying, look, did you support this policy? Did you support that policy? And if not, what is your new policy? And if there are no changes, then what the hell is today all about? It's simply a sort of it will be perceived as a politically manipulative assassination.
Well, this argument, Graham, that it's about, you know, going to a leader who's more consultative, who will listen to the ministry, listen to Cabinet more than Kevin Rudd did, is that reason enough to change, or is this what every challenger says?
Well, yeah, it's a nice line, but only listen on what? You know, what is she going to change? Are we going to junk the resources tax? If so, then what does she and Wayne Swan do about the budget, which would be in tatters? What about asylum thing? Are we really going to sort of introduce the Howard policy, in which case, you know, one of the big reasons for Labor being elected last time goes down the drain? Julia has always going to get to this position, but it'd be interesting to know on day one if she knows what to do when she gets there.
David, can I jump in on behalf of the Labor Party and answer some of these questions, or at least how I think they're likely to try to answer some of them? I think Julia Gillard certainly needs to change some policies. There's no doubt about that. Otherwise, as Graham says, what's this all been about? But she doesn't want to change too many policies because a lot of what this is about the dissatisfaction of Kevin Rudd personally. That's what opinion polls are showing. That's what leaked polling, certainly Liberal leaked polling or Liberal Party pollsters leaked polling is showing. And so the key to her changing things, I think, is to change policies that are perceived to have been adjustments late in the Rudd government term, rather than things that have been core elements of it through most of its 2.5 years.
Pete, what does... I mean, further to the points that Graham was making, what does Julia Gillard do on border protection? She's got no room to move. And you listen to the backbenchers who raised concerns in the caucus. It's about the message. It's about the ability to get out there forcefully and sell what they're doing. I think that most of them on asylum seekers believe they've got a good message to sell, but that Rudd vacated the field on that matter.
And it could be a slowly approach on something like asylum seekers. I think we'll see her come out with strong positions on some policy issues today, assuming she wins.
Yeah.
But asylum seekers might be a bit of a slow burn. Let's see how she argues the case compared to the way Kevin Rudd struggled to argue the case with a perhaps not dissimilar policy before looking to move, if she moves at all.
And argue the case.
That's right, but be prepared
and
to
not
argue.
vacate the field like Rudd did, or like a lot of his MPs believe he did.
That's right. All of this comes back to... There's a perception, I think, which is attached to Kevin Rudd's declining popularity, that in the last few months, last 6 months perhaps, he jettisoned things that people believed he felt strongly about. The ETS was the key driver behind a lot of other issues that were attached to that. Now, Gillard has to, I think, come out and say to people, look, we recognise that the government moved in the wrong direction over the last few months, but we believe we've been a good government. She needs to sell the message that they've been a good government because she's been the Deputy Prime Minister in it. So she needs to sell most of the 2.5 years they've been in power and maybe just argue that Rudd went off the rails a little bit in the latter half, and she's going to correct that.
Of course, she's got a huge stake in it. David, I want to also point something out to you. Someone who is aligned to the Rudd Swan camp has sent a message to me in relation to his management style, and that was, he says, on the Thursday before the super profits tax was announced, Rudd still did not know what he wanted in the package and could not make a decision. That's an example of his management style, that completely indecisive is the message from that particular person, who is, as I say, from the Gillard Swan support base.
Well, that's interesting. Let's just quickly, if we can, go to David Lipson, who's downstairs there with that gaggle of journalists hovering outside the caucus room where the meeting's been underway for 25 minutes. David, I'm sure it's a quiet time down there now, a lot of anticipation, a lot of staring at mobile phones.
Yeah, you've picked it exactly right, David. It is extremely tense down here. Probably about 60 or 70 journalists in total, almost the entire press gallery, it seems, has gathered here outside the Labor Party room. And just a short time ago, there was a bit of a nervous hush, and one of my colleagues remarked that if we keep our voices down, you can hear the screams going on behind closed doors and the blood running down the walls. Now, obviously, that's a little bit of colour that is going on here. But basically, what's formed here is something of a gauntlet of journalists, where a little passageway has been made in the mob for the party whip to step forward in front of the cameras and announce what the final decision will be. As I'm sure you've been reporting, most people here do firmly...
Let's go to Kieran. Sorry, Lippo, let's go to Kieran.
David, we're just hearing reports that there was no ballot, that Kevin Rudd has stood down at the last minute. We don't know, we haven't confirmed those reports yet from our own sources, but apparently there was no ballot. Kevin Rudd stood down at the 11th hour, as you predicted before the caucus, and Julia Gillard was elected unopposed as Prime Minister, as Labor leader, and will be sworn in obviously later today. That's the tweet this morning by the Australian journalist Samantha Maiden. We're waiting to have that confirmed ourselves, but you did predict it before the caucus that he would stand down at the 11th hour. That was certainly the speculation around the place. We're awaiting confirmation of that ourselves, but certainly if that is the case, that would be at least give Gillard some sort of position upon which to move forward with a sense of unity if he's done that. It'll be interesting to see what he will do beyond today, but that's the report. There was no ballot, that Gillard was elected unopposed.
All right, Sam Maiden has just sent that out on Twitter, as Kieran says there, that Kevin Rudd stood aside. There was no ballot, apparently, and that gives Julia Gillard the leadership unopposed to become Labor leader and Prime Minister, Australia's first Prime Minister. we're just waiting to get confirmation from our own sources on this. But the reports there, as you can see, are that there was no ballot in the caucus meeting, which has been underway for about 25 minutes, that Kevin Rudd, in the end, stood aside. He was under a great deal of pressure last night and again this morning to do this, to avoid a messy leadership contest, to avoid a blood spill, and to simply have a smooth transition to Julia Gillard. I can tell you he would have taken some convincing, though. His language last night was defiant. He wanted a contest, he wanted to go down fighting, and was confident, in fact, last night that he could still hang on. But the numbers were clear last night at about 1 a.m. I had a phone call from a cabinet source saying that it was all over, that Julia Gillard had the numbers. Then this morning that firmed up the numbers, as Kieran was reporting, had firmed up to as much as 74 out of 112 for Julia Gillard. That sort of emphatic support meant that Kevin Rudd really could have been quite badly humiliated in a vote. So it now seems that he took the advice of his colleagues, read the writing on the wall and stood aside to allow Julia Gillard to assume the leadership with no ballot required. Kieran, as we say, we're just seeing this reported initially from Sam Maiden from The Australian on Twitter. We're still waiting for confirmation of our own that this has happened, but this does seem to be the story.
Yeah, absolutely. And the ticket, the unlikely ticket you would have thought a few years ago of Swan and Gillard look like they will be taking the roles of Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister. I'm fascinated to think what Kevin Rudd will do. Peter Van Onselen, is there any prospect that Rudd will stay in the camp, potentially even as a minister, or will it be I'm out of here by-election in his Brisbane seat of Griffith?
I think somewhere in between. The fact, if it's right that he has stepped down and that there hasn't been a ballot, that's a sign that they're going to try to heal the wounds here, and that Kevin Rudd has one eye to his legacy. He doesn't want to be seen as a wrecker post-losing the leadership, so he's trying to make this as amicable as possible. Now, that tells me that he probably won't sit in the team as a minister. I think that would be divisive and unnecessary, and I don't think he would want to do it. But I don't think he'll force a by-election. I think he will probably go at the general election as part of this harmony not to destabilise. Now, even if there was a suggestion of a by-election, they could always hold that off this close to an election anyway. But all the telltale signs are that if he has decided not to contest the ballot, he is playing ball with the machine men who have moved the bar here to Julia Gillard, and that means that we're not going to see the kind of bloodletting that some people thought Kevin Rudd might be capable of if he lost a ballot and lost the Prime Ministership with it.
And that's got to be a good thing, David Spears. You would have thought that Gillard would have that sense, albeit, you know, sort of a belated sense of unity if he's done that and fallen on his sword before any challenge, any finalised numbers were forced to a vote.
Yes, although, you know, I still think it would have been better for the party, obviously, had Kevin Rudd done this last night. Instead, we had the situation where he flagged his intention to fight this out in a contest. That meant that MPs this morning were, some of them, backing him publicly, and that spells division, and it's all there on the record now with a number of MPs saying they wanted Kevin Rudd to stay and why. So it has created a very public split this morning amongst Labor MPs, which could have been avoided had Kevin Rudd last night made this decision to stand aside for a seamless transition to Julia Gillard. We are now awaiting a caucus spokesman, the party whip, to come out and report the outcome of this meeting. But as we've been saying now for some minutes, it appears there was no ballot. Kevin Rudd decided to stand aside, make way for Julia Gillard to become Prime Minister, to become Australia's first female Prime Minister. An historic day, a leader dumped by his party in his first term. This really is an extraordinary turn of political fortunes for someone who last year was rivaling Bob Hawke as Australia's most popular Prime Minister of all time, now to be well, humiliated by his party, having to say last night that he would fight on, and then this morning standing aside due to a lack of caucus support, a sheer, well, falling away numbers throughout the night and this morning, to the point where Julia Gillard's support was emphatic and clear, and leaving Kevin Rudd with no option but to stand aside or face humiliation in a contest. We will have this confirmed shortly, we hope, from someone coming out of the caucus meeting, which has been underway for about half an hour. Peter Van Onselen in our Canberra studio. When you step back from this and you think of what's happened here to Labor and to Kevin Rudd, this is an extraordinary turn of events. Who would have thought a year ago that we'd be looking at this situation where he has stood aside for Julia Gillard?
Absolutely, David, and cut me off if you have some breaking news, because I'll go through the timeline here. It's an extraordinary set of events. The Kevin 07 team wins the election. Kevin Rudd is a Labor hero. He's not a long-term loved Labor figure, but he becomes a hero, knocking off John Howard, a figure despised in a lot of Labor circles. He then ratifies Kyoto. He then apologises to Indigenous communities. Symbolic events, to be sure, but ones that Howard wouldn't do and were important, I think, to his initial popularity, certainly with that Labor base. His popularity goes through the roof. He's a more popular figure, according to Newspoll, than any Labor Prime Minister, or indeed any Prime Minister previously, and it only keeps going up. And then suddenly, when he deals with Brendan Nelson, incidentally, who he manages to destroy as an alternative leader because he's not able to muscle up to the popularity of Kevin Rudd. The global financial crisis hits. There are concerns maybe that a novice regime, a novice government, won't be able to deal with the economic crisis as well, perhaps, as the previous government would have been able to. However, the first round of stimulus spending was regarded to be good. The narrative worked of him handing out cheques and spending money to stave off recession, at least initially. But then over time, as the spend comes out and question marks over elements of the spend, certainly the roof insulation scheme, certainly elements of the building the education revolution, this gives the opposition a narrative to be able to deal with. And as a result of using that, they're then able to start questioning the competence of Kevin Rudd to deliver on things.
Peter,
but nevertheless...
sorry to interrupt you. Here comes some Labor MPs emerging from the caucus meeting.
That's Senator Michael Forshaw, and behind him Dick Adams, the member for Lions. Obviously,
Let's have a listen to what they're going to say.
The result.
Ladies and gentlemen, as returning officer of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, I wish to report to you that a special meeting of the party was held this morning, at which the positions of leader and deputy leader were declared vacant. The new leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, elected unopposed, is Julia Gillard. The new deputy leader of the Federal Parliamentary Labor Party, elected unopposed, is Wayne Swan. The next Labor Prime Minister and the first female Prime Minister of this country will be Julia Gillard, and Wayne Swan will be the next Deputy Prime Minister of Australia.
Thank you. Mr. Rudd speak.
Each of the people elected, as well as Prime Minister Rudd, spoke to the caucus. I don't wish to canvass what they said. I will leave it for those members to report as they feel fit to do so.
Mr. Rudd, though?
The meeting was conducted in a very orderly manner. It was, yes, I can say it was a very gracious speech by the Prime Minister and also by the new leader and deputy leader.
Was there any display motion from the Prime Minister?
Well, I think that's obvious. It was no ballot because there was only one nomination for both positions.
Was there any display of emotion from the Prime Minister?
This has been a difficult time for the Prime Minister. It's been a difficult time for the party. I will leave it to the Prime Minister, Mr. Rudd, to make further comments. I don't wish to comment other than to say that he led us to victory in 2007, a victory that was achieved when many people thought that we would be still spending more years in opposition. That is a great achievement. He did that with Julia Gillard as the deputy leader. We now have a new team, and I am looking forward and looking confidently forward to the next election. And I think Julia Gillard will be elected at that election as Prime Minister and Wayne Swan as Deputy Prime Minister.
Is there a sense
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Is the official transition going to happen straight away?
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
What happens procedurally?
Well, they are matters that will be obviously worked out. It's not for me to comment on those matters. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Look, they are matters for the executive to sort out. They're not matters for me as returning officer of the party. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
I think Anthony Albanese will be out to speak here pretty soon. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Fine. Thank you.
Well, there you have it. Confirmation that Australia has a new Prime Minister and its first female Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, elected unopposed as the Labor leader in this morning's caucus ballot. Well, in fact, there was no ballot in the end. Kevin Rudd bowed to pressure and stood aside, making way for a seamless transition to his deputy, Julia Gillard, to take the top job and for Wayne Swan to become Deputy Prime Minister, also unopposed. So Julia Gillard becomes Australia's new Prime Minister. She will be sworn in, you would expect, in the coming days, but as of right now, she is the Labor leader and Prime Minister designate until she's sworn in by the Governor-General. This transition in the end was seamless, but it has been a bloody 24 hours for the Labor Party. Julia Gillard emerges after some tumultuous few months for the party, sliding in the polls, struggling over climate change, its mining tax, asylum seekers, but still having seen Australia through a global recession, still having delivered reforms on health and education. But the party in the end decided that Kevin Rudd could not lead them to another victory, that his problems were too great. He had too many enemies within his ranks as well. And so Julia Gillard has emerged as leader. We will be hearing from her shortly, you would expect, on this victory. You can see Labor MPs leaving the caucus meeting there in the background. Harry Jenkins, the Speaker of the House. There are some, I'm sure, some tensions being released now as people really try and work out how the dust is going to settle on this. Few would have thought, even 24 hours ago, that this was possible. Kevin Rudd, who got through a caucus meeting earlier this week and was expected to lead Labor to the election, is no more. Lindsay Tanner emerges there on his own as well. He will no doubt continue to play a very senior role. Perhaps if Wayne Swan shifts to a new position, Lindsay Tanner may become Treasurer. But he no doubt will be weighing what all this means for his prospects as a future leader as well. But today is Julia Gillard's story. She is the new Prime Minister. She is the new Labor leader. Kieran Gilbert in Canberra. What a fascinating development.
It's been a remarkable 12 hours, 14 hours, hasn't it, David? But I can confirm to you that Wayne Swan will remain in the Treasury portfolio. I've just been advised of that. He will be the Deputy Prime Minister and Treasurer. Lindsay Tanner apparently wasn't a player in all of this. He has been a bystander in many respects. As I say, there is a fairly long-standing animosity, professional animosity between he and Julia Gillard, and he won't be moving into the Treasury portfolio. That will stay in the hands of Wayne Swan. But a remarkable development. The first female Prime Minister in this nation's history. It'll be straight into it as well. You'd imagine she'll be holding a news conference within the next hour or so. And then her first parliamentary test. It feels like a year away, but it's 2 o'clock this afternoon when question time comes around. It will be a moment in history, regardless of what you think about the politics of the Labor Party and Julia Gillard. Peter Van Onselen, when Julia Gillard takes to the dispatch box, the first female PM not acting in the role, it will be a moment in history. A very historic moment, and Labor will be hoping that the history of it and the enthusiasm of it will result in the kind of honeymoon that she now will need to get past this very destabilising period. Let's cut to the chase here, Kieran. When Labor MPs woke up this morning, anything could have happened probably around a Gillard Prime Ministership, but in terms of bloodletting and Rudd standing against her, what has happened is the best possible result for the Labor Party on the back of what happened yesterday. And then some people will say, and this will certainly be their narrative, it's the best possible result from the last week or two because it has got rid of an unpopular Prime Minister and he has left without forcing a challenge ultimately. So Gillard now has to tell us what she stands for,
for, tell us what's different and similar about her to the previous Prime Minister, and build her own narrative in what is going to have to be a very short time ahead of the election.
Well, we knew the numbers were certainly away from Gillard, David Spears, away from Kevin Rudd and to Julia Gillard before the vote. He's seen the writing on the wall as you had anticipated that he would, and made it as seamless as it could have been, despite the drama of last night.
I think he's done the right thing this morning. Perhaps it would have been better to do it last night and avoid an evening of, well, counting, speculation, people taking positions, people backing him publicly. Here comes Jenny Macklin and Stephen Smith. Are they going to say something to the waiting media? We'll see. But two senior figures who I understand both went with Julia Gillard on this, as did, well, most of the party in the end.
Lovely to see you all.
Thank you. And Brendan O'Connor, the Home Affairs Minister, as well. But for all of them now trying to digest what this means for their own personal careers and what this means for Labor. Some heavy hearts there as well. Stephen Conroy, the Communications Minister, a senior right faction player in Victoria as well. This is, well, a real ground shift for the Labor Party today. For Kevin Rudd, it must be absolutely devastating. Here's someone who fought so hard to get Labor into office, who really was responsible in many ways. His personal popularity for getting Labor over the line in 2007, ending the Prime Ministership of John Howard and the Coalition, now to be torn down on the eve of an election by his MPs, his Labor colleagues, nervous that he couldn't do it again, worried about the slide in the primary vote. The two-party results still had Labor in front, but his own popularity, his satisfaction rating had dipped as well. They knew they were feeling the pain on asylum seekers, on the mining tax, on climate change, and in the end, they've knifed this leader. He might have stood aside, but it was the numbers put in front of him that convinced him in the end to do this. Ashley Gillen is outside where this is all happening in the courtyard. Ashley, this is extraordinary. MPs are leaving the room now, no doubt trying to come to terms with the decision that's been made here, the end of Kevin Rudd's Prime Ministership. Julia Gillard may well be sworn in by the Governor-General before question time this afternoon at 2 o'clock, which is when her first official duties will be as the new Prime Minister. She'll have to hold a news conference before then to tell us what's happening. But Ashley, your thoughts down there?
Look, Julia Eileen Gillard as our first female Prime Minister, this is a significant moment for women across this country, regardless of what side of the political divide you fall on. Julia Gillard has today broken through the top layer of the glass ceiling in this country, and I think that is seriously a significant moment that will really obviously go down in history. She was our first female Deputy Prime Minister. She was also the first foreign-born Deputy. We're used to seeing Julia Gillard acting in this role. She took on first the acting PM role just a week or so after Kevin Rudd was elected, when he flew overseas to go to the Bali UN Climate Conference, and she's stepped in seamlessly to that role a number of times since. Of course, if we look at who Julia Gillard is, well, her background, she was raised in Adelaide, she went to university in Melbourne, so we have a Victorian leader now. Her background is in law. She was an industrial relations lawyer, entered Parliament here in 1998, so she certainly has the experience to do the job. Now, of course, we're turning to the significant decisions she will be making today. She'll have to come up with her front bench. We will be looking at, will the unions and the factional leaders have more of a say in Julia Gillard's ministerial lineup than they did under Kevin Rudd? Questions like policy decisions on three key policy areas, for example, asylum seekers, the emissions trading scheme. What will she do on climate policy? Also, the very controversial mining tax. Will she be able to scale that back and come up with a deal with the big resources industry?
I just want to interrupt you there. Tanya Plibersek with tears in her eyes. She's leaving the caucus. I mean, for a lot of Labor MPs, this is a very emotional thing to do. Yeah, well, look, I said tears in her eyes, but my understanding was she was not backing Kevin Rudd in this. But look, either way, this is an emotional day for a lot of Labor MPs to see the end of the Prime Ministership and the transition to Julia Gillard really is quite a moment. Nicola Roxon there, the Health Minister, as well, coming out. Ashley, you were explaining and putting in good context, I think, what this day means and who Julia Gillard is. That background that she brings is very, well, it is dissimilar to many who've come to the Lodge before her. She will also, we'll have to check the history books here as to whether there's been an unmarried Prime Minister before, but she'll be moving into the Lodge. The Rudds, Therese Rain and the kids will be out. There'll be time enough to make that transition, but these are some of the many changes. Not to forget the staff involved here, as Graham Morris was pointing out to us last night, a big upheaval for them as well. They're all technically out of a job. Many will get their jobs back, but these are the sorts of changes that affect these people who work in Parliament House, the MPs, their staff, their families. This is an enormous change for them, Ash.
Absolutely, and we would assume that Tim Matheson, her partner, would be moving into the Lodge with her. We saw a profile on Julia Gillard with her family members speaking some years ago, and her mother in that had said that she'd said to Julia that if she gets to the Lodge, she's expecting a room in there. So who knows, maybe the whole family will be shipped over. It is a huge upheaval here at Parliament House. In terms of the decisions that have to be made today, well, Kevin Rudd was due to fly out to the G20 meeting in Toronto tomorrow. So we would assume that Julia Gillard would stay here to sort out her ministerial lineup, but there was a bilateral meeting with Barack Obama lined up for that visit. That would be a very good picture opportunity for Julia Gillard. I would think that she would instead send her new deputy, Wayne Swan, to do that job. Also, election timing, David. What will she do now? Will she go to the polls while she has this momentum behind her and a bit of a honeymoon with voters, or will she need to establish herself and wait, maybe push it out until next year? There are a lot of major questions that she will be having to nut out over the next 24, 48 hours.
Ashley, thank you. And look, Kieran Gilbert, there is this G20 meeting. I'd be floored if she decided to go to that. Kevin Rudd was due to fly out tomorrow. I don't think that's... Well, he's not going, and I don't think Julia Gillard will be going either. She needs time to really work out what they're going to do on here she comes now, Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan, her new deputy by her side. Both. All right, both. We're trying to see their faces there through the crowd. Both taking their time now as they emerge victorious, and really without challenge from this Labor caucus meeting. The new Prime Minister and Deputy Prime Minister, as Kieran reported earlier, Wayne Swan will remain as Treasurer. Julia Gillard becomes Prime Minister. They've ended Kevin Rudd's reign. And now with a whole host of their supporters behind them, jostling for position. I think Kevin Rudd is there with them as well. Let's have a look. No, it's not Kevin Rudd. It's Simon Crean behind him. Kevin Rudd, no doubt, will have made a hasty exit. But Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan with backbenchers behind them. Now to tell us about, hopefully, tell us about where to now for Labor and the Gillard government.
I feel very honoured, and I will be making a key statement very shortly. Prime Minister, how does it feel to make this statement? I feel very honoured, and I'll be making a key statement shortly. Thank you.
Just come back. Sorry, mate. Let's get right past me. I'll get other side. Watch them.
Well, the new Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, yet to be sworn in, but given the job by the Labor caucus today, unopposed. Kevin Rudd stood aside. Wayne Swan, the Treasurer, becomes her deputy, the Deputy Prime Minister and Deputy Labor Leader as well. They will be making a statement shortly, but you heard her say there she's very honoured, and well, may she be very honoured. Australia's first female Prime Minister taking the reins in a bloodless coup in the end. No vote required, but certainly Kevin Rudd, it was made very clear to him this morning where the numbers stood, and they weren't with him. They were emphatically with Julia Gillard. Kieran, I was going to ask you earlier, not much chance that Julia Gillard's going to head to the G20 summit tomorrow. She needs to bed down these policy conundrums that she now faces, try and explain how she can change some of them, if she's going to change some of them, what this change in leadership is all about, why it's happened, and how she intends to turn Labor's fortunes around.
And come up with a team, a front bench team, first and foremost, I suppose, Dave. I guess that she will be sworn in today before the rest of the lineup is announced. The executive of her and the Deputy Prime Minister, Mr Swan, will obviously take precedence. You would assume that it's going to take a couple of days for her to come up with the rest of her front bench team, and it'd be remarkable if she was able to make that flight at 11 a.m. tomorrow to Canada. So after Barack Obama stood us up a couple of times, he'll be stood up by the Australian Prime Minister, albeit, you know, due to some fairly extraordinary circumstances. I want to bring in Graham Morris, if I can, who's with us. Graham, I want to get your thoughts on what you've seen. It ended up being a fairly smooth transition given the events of last night.
Yeah, well, I think we should all, well, congratulations to Julia Gillard. She is, there's only 27 other people who have held this office, and it's an extraordinary honour. But I think we also ought to be saying, well played, Kevin Rudd. This was a brutal and...
Kevin Rudd now with John Faulkner by his side. Let's just have a listen to this if we can. Can we bring up the audio?
Yeah, well, I have to admit, Senator Falk, can you please with yourself? Just before the question. Yeah, they're quite substantial. So I've done that. If nothing else.
What do you reckon happened? How do you feel like it?
What happened? So he was there.
Must be disappointed. Will you be making a statement later today, Mr. Rudd?
So got delayed because of the
So yeah, we'll put them the 3 days. What do you blame for your downfall, Mr. Rudd? It is? Yeah, of course. What do you intend to do now, Mr. Rudd?
Good morning. I'm walking through Parliament with Kevin Rudd right now. With John Faulkner and some of his supporters.
All the very best, Mr.
Walking back into the Prime Minister's office there, his office that he now has to vacate. Wow, what a scene. That was obviously one of the most difficult walks of his life, but he had there a shoulder to support him through that with some small talk. John Faulkner standing by him as he made that very difficult walk through the media pack there, having just lost the leadership of the Labor Party and what's more, the Prime Ministership. He handed it over in a seamless transition to Julia Gillard in the end, after it was made very clear to him that he did not have the numbers. So there was no ballot, but Kevin Rudd there trying to keep a smile on his face and keep some small talk with John Faulkner as he walked the gauntlet of those cameras throughout Parliament into the Prime Minister's office. I'm told we now have with us from Melbourne, from our Melbourne studio, Arthur Sinodinos, a former Chief of Staff to John Howard. Arthur, I don't know if you saw those pictures there, but what a moment we've just witnessed. Kevin Rudd having been tipped out of the leadership, having to make that very difficult walk back to the Prime Minister's office, which he will now have to vacate, along with the Lodge. Julia Gillard becomes Australia's first female Prime Minister. What are your thoughts? Has Labor done the right thing here?
David, I think this is a remarkable day in Australian politics. I think Labor have really panicked. Rudd will go down as one of the greatest self-inflicted wounds in Australia's political history. I think they're grasping at straws now. It's very close to a poll. It's always destabilising for a governing party to change leaders so close to an election. I think the opposition will argue, well, you've changed the leader, but have you changed the policies that led to the problems that the party now faces? And I think that's the dilemma they face. They've got a group of state-based apparatchiks who believe that you can transplant the state approach to federal politics, and so there's a lot of focus on the latest opinion polling and focus groups, but What counts in Canberra, what counts in federal politics is steadiness in policy and consistency over time, and there hasn't been enough of that lately. Kevin Rudd has paid the price for that, and Julia Gillard has been handed a poisoned chalice. Now, she will be a more formidable opponent for Tony Abbott than Kevin Rudd was, because Kevin was carrying all those negatives, but nonetheless she has some big things on her plate that she needs to resolve very quickly if she's to gain traction with the Australian people. While it's terrific to have the first female Prime Minister, what people will look at on day 2 of her Prime Ministership is, what does she stand for, what is she going to do to make this a better country, and can she remove some of the problems that Labor encountered, particularly over the last 10 or 12 months.
Well, the reason for the change, Arthur, is that Labor was clearly panicked about their situation in the polls and Kevin Rudd's ability to turn things around. They'd lost faith in the guy who got them there in 2007, who beat your old boss, John Howard. He saw off 2 other Liberal leaders after that, Brendan Nelson and Malcolm Turnbull, but now he has paid the price himself. Do you think, though, that Julia Gillard can win for Labor, that she can turn things around and can beat Tony Abbott?
I think the Liberals would be very remiss if they underestimated Julia Gillard. She's very tough. She's been prepared to tear down a first-term Prime Minister. She is determined to lead them to the election and to win. So I think they're going to have to work very hard against her. There will be a honeymoon effect, a wow factor from her becoming the Prime Minister. So they have to work very hard now to make sure that they prosecute their case against the government. And let me say, in relation to 2007, Kevin Rudd won by exploiting the negatives that built up after 11.5 years of coalition rule and of John Howard rule. It won't be that easy for them this time. They can't go back and keep rehashing the past. They've got their own record now on the record, and that's exactly what Tony Abbott and the coalition team will be going for.
Well, this is an extraordinary day, and you're witnessing there just the repeat of those amazing pictures of Kevin Rudd after leaving that caucus meeting, walking with John Faulkner, who you've got to take your hat off to, giving him that support to walk the gauntlet there that just seemed to go on forever as the cameras followed him and journalists threw questions at him. And it's such a difficult time, having lost the leadership, returning to his office with a smile and with some small talk with John Faulkner, but clearly just wanting to get the hell out of there. This, of course, is, well, such a difficult day for him to lose the leadership. But for Julia Gillard, she does need to confront Arthur Sinodinos these policy challenges that you mentioned there, and that won't be easy given she has been pivotal in each of the policy decisions that have created trouble here for Kevin Rudd. They're the pictures now of Julia Gillard and her new deputy, Wayne Swan, as they left the caucus meeting. But from someone who's been a Chief of Staff to a Prime Minister, Arthur Sinodinos, through many elections, if you were in Julia Gillard's shoes now, election timing, what do you think? Does she need, you mentioned the honeymoon effect, she'll get this bubble, which no doubt she will. Does she capitalise on that with a snap election? Does she wait and perhaps push the election out to, it can be held as late as April next year? What would be your advice?
I wouldn't expect her to have an election next year. She'll have an election this year. She'll spend the next few weeks, I think, going around the country, being seen, talking to people, listening, consulting. She'll want to establish in the public mind that she's a different kettle of fish to Kevin. If one of Kevin's big negatives was inability to listen or to communicate, she'll want to make sure that she's listening and consulting and being seen to do so. And then she and her troops will determine whether she has traction in the polls to justify going sooner rather than later. I think she would like to capitalise on a honeymoon effect, but she also, as I mentioned before, has some major policy challenges on her hands. The mining tax, the figures around revenue that's raised by the mining tax are baked into the budget. What does she do to get some sort of accommodation with the miners to get them off her back? She can't afford an election where she's got too many distractions. She wants to be able to calm things down and turn her guns on Tony Abbott and try and make him the issue in the election.
Arthur, do stay with us for a moment. I'll see if others in Canberra have a question for you. Kieran Gilbert, Arthur suggesting there that Julia Gillard will still have to go to an election this year. I think that's right. But does she go sooner? Does she go later? These are the questions. And for Kevin Rudd, well, does he stick around in politics? Does he stay there on the backbench? I doubt he'd stay on the front bench. Or does he bow out and look for something international? He's still a young guy. It's an end of the Prime Ministership, but could he come back?
It's a tough game, Arthur Sinodinos. We saw your former boss. He lost his seat at the last election. Now this Prime Minister falls before he even gets to face the electorate for a second time. What do you think Kevin Rudd will do in the context of what David just said? I know it's very difficult as from an outsider's perspective, but do you think we can expect a by-election, or is Kevin Rudd the sort of bloke that might hang around on the front bench?
Well, I think you're suggesting he might hang around on the backbench because I don't think he's going to be offered a front bench position. I'd be surprised he'd take it if he were, given that he's been Prime Minister. I'd expect him sooner or later to bow out of politics. These days, people don't seem to hang around when they lose the top spot. I know Malcolm Turnbull came back, but that was a bit against the norm. I would expect Kevin is so restless, he'd want to go off and paint on some other bigger canvas. What that is, I don't know. There's been talk about the UN in the past. I don't put much store in that. But he will be very restless, and he will spend the rest of his life probably travelling and consulting and trying to reinterpret the last few years and defend what there is of his legacy.
I want to bring in Peter Van Onselen if I can. Pete, what do you think? I mean, there are precedents internationally, though, for where Prime Ministers do hang around in parliaments and indeed do take front bench spots, although not in Australia.
There are, but I don't see that happening here with this Prime Minister. I think that he will avoid the by-election, certainly. He won't want to be seen to be wrecking by forcing that. I don't think he'll take a front bench position, and I think he'll look to exit at the next election. I'd like to ask Arthur a question and then maybe throw to Graham as well on it. A bit of free advice. I don't know if both of you as former Chiefs of Staff to John Howard are prepared to give this free advice to the new Labor Prime Minister, but my question for both of you is, what would you be advising Julia Gillard to do at the moment in relation to the twin issues of refugees and the emissions trading scheme? And I don't mean what you think personally about it. I mean, what would you strategically suggest she did from the position she's in now that she's Prime Minister? Maybe, Arthur, if you could go first.
Well, look, I think on asylum seekers, if she now suddenly lurches back to what you might describe as the left, that won't help her in many of the seats where they've got a problem based on the polling that we've seen. I'd be staggered if David Bradbury, the member for Lindsay, or others would be saying, come on, Julia, we've got to move further to the left on these issues. I think she'll want to largely leave that policy in place. On the ETS, again, I'm not sure, having had the scare of the great big new tax already, she'll want to move very much on that. I'd be staggered if she suddenly came back and said, well, we're going to have a double dissolution election around something like the ETS. I'm expecting that she will put a focus on trying to resolve something like the mining tax and trying to emphasise to the public there's been a change of style, a change of tone in terms of the government. It's a new, gentler, kinder, more sharing government, and try and then feed off the negatives of the opposition leader.
Graham Morris, your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I don't think you can't reintroduce the emissions trading thing. It'd just be an absolute whopper tax that would make her very, very vulnerable during an election campaign. And I'm not sure she can move on refugees. But if I was advising the new Prime Minister, I'd be saying, hey, boss, what's our biggest problem today? What are the cartoonists going to do to us? What are the headline writers going to do to us? And I think you will find that a lot of them are going to say, well, she wouldn't have got there without the trade union leaders' support. So somehow or other, she has to divorce herself from the trade union leadership. Otherwise, we're going to have this image from day one of the trade union leaders' queen. And I'm not sure that that is an image that Julia Gillard would want to take into election, nor would her supporters. So I think, I understand the importance of those policy ones, but in the end, Kevin Rudd got it right. He had to junk the emissions trading thing. It was a mess, and the rest of the world wasn't following us. He hardened up on the asylum thing. Well, he had to do that. But I think the new tag is, how does Julia Gillard divorce herself from the trade union leadership? That's hard.
All right,
David,
Graham, thank you.
I don't know if you've seen, Dave, I just should point out that Anthony Albanese, the Leader of the House, has called for the House of Representatives to be suspended, so we might not see Julia Gillard in question time after all.
I think we
Why?
I would
have to grab
propose that later this day I would move a resolution adjourning or suspending the sitting of the House until such time as the bells ring. I will agree on the time with the manager of opposition business so that all members can be informed, and I will then inform the House as such.
All right, so Anthony Albanese there, and the government will get its way with its numbers on that, suspending the House of Reps until further notice today. So the House of Reps won't sit until, presumably, Julia Gillard can be sworn in by the Governor-General. If they can make that happen as soon as they can, that will happen today. Ashley Gillen downstairs out in one of the parliamentary courtyards there with another keen observer of all this morning, Nick Xenophon.
Yes, David, look, around the halls of Parliament here, we've seen Labor MPs and senators rushing around, but they've all gone to ground and none are publicly commenting at this stage. They're probably waiting for Julia Gillard to hold her first news conference as Prime Minister. But the Independent Senator Nick Xenophon is with me, and he's happy to give us his reaction to these shocking events this morning.
Well, you wouldn't call them shocking, would you? I just think the whole place has got a surreal vibe to it right now. Last night I was in a Senate committee meeting. The Labor senator on that committee didn't know anything about it at around 7:45, but within an hour it was all on. So it was really quite surreal how it unfolded last night.
A lot of the criticism directed at Kevin Rudd's leadership is about the lack of consultation. Is that something that you discovered in your dealings with him in the Senate, and are you hoping that you'll see more of that with Julia Gillard?
I only had two meetings with the Prime Minister in nearly 3 years since I've been elected. They were both, rare pleasures, and they were good meetings. I've had a number of meetings with Julia Gillard in relation to legislation. I can actually say now that I've got the Prime Minister's mobile number. Hopefully she won't change it. But she was consultative, or she has been consultative, and she's been good to deal with, and I expect that will continue. And I think the writing was on the wall when earlier this week a number of Labor MPs who I thought were solid Rudd supporters expressed in pretty blunt terms their misgivings about the PM. So I thought that was ominous, but I didn't think that it would actually move for a change before the election.
Okay, Nick Xenophon, thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Ashley. I just want to ask Arthur Sinodinos a final question before he leaves us. Arthur Sinodinos, a former Chief of Staff to John Howard. This has been an extraordinary fall from grace for Kevin Rudd. A year ago, he was one of our most popular Prime Ministers of all time. Now he's turfed out before the end of his first term. An election just months away. Julia Gillard now has an enormous task ahead of her. We've talked about some of the policy challenges she faces. She will have a honeymoon, no doubt. Australia's first female Prime Minister. She'll have a lot of attention. No doubt this will snap voters' minds back into politics and make them pay attention once again, which Labor hopes they will pay attention to some of their achievements rather than just the negatives on the mining tax. You were saying that you think Kevin Rudd will probably get out of politics. He's certainly not going to serve on Julia Gillard's front bench, you wouldn't think. Perhaps something international awaits. You were saying perhaps not the UN, but who knows? For Kevin Rudd, he's still a young guy. There's another career ahead of him if he wants. You would think he's a former Prime Minister, but this is an extraordinary end to his political career if indeed he does bow out. What does it do, though, to the brand of Labor? We saw after the Whitlam government lost after one term, the brand of Labor damaged for many, many years. Do you think this will have lasting damage to Labor's legitimacy with voters?
Well, I think if voters believe that nothing much is going to change in terms of policy, if they believe that Labor seems to be driven by polls rather than some sort of policy consistency, then I think it will do lasting damage. She has a very limited amount of time to do something about it. I think Graham's point about the role the unions have played in all this, it is a bit rich because, some of these union chiefs have been out there supporting the mining tax, and they're the very same union chiefs who last night knifed Kevin Rudd and put in Julia Gillard. And I think Tony Abbott may well be challenging Julia to an early election on the basis that, look, you haven't been elected by anybody except the Parliamentary Labor Party, and really it's up to the Australian people about what policy should be going forward. I think the brand is significantly damaged, but Labor will try and say, well, that was really Kevin Rudd. It was Rudd Labor, but we're Australian Labor, and they're going to try and pick up the pieces and, as I said, try and strike a new tone through a new leader.
Arthur, just before you go, I'll just tell you that Julia Gillard's holding a news conference at 11 o'clock in Canberra, under an hour from now. we'll bring you that live. You've got a special copy of the Herald Sun there. Show it to us. What does it say? There we go.
It's PM Julia.
All right, there you go. So an edition's gone out already on that. Arthur Sinodinos, good to talk to you this morning on a momentous day in politics. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot.
So, as we've been reporting now for the last hour, Julia Gillard has been elected unopposed as Labor's new leader and will become Australia's first female Prime Minister once she is sworn in. Kevin Rudd stood aside in the end without the need for a ballot, allowing a seamless transition. Wayne Swan remains Treasurer but becomes Julia Gillard's Deputy Prime Minister Wayne Swan. The team, Julia Gillard and Wayne Swan, will be holding a news conference in under an hour from now. That will be at 11 o'clock in Canberra. We'll bring that to you live. You saw Kevin Rudd just a short while ago making that difficult walk from the caucus meeting back to his office, clearly having suffered a heavy blow, but with John Faulkner at his side to prop him up and keep a smile on his face as he ran the gauntlet of the cameras. Now, I'm just hearing that Julia Gillard's parents have been speaking to the media this morning. Here's what they had to say.
And Julia, that will go to a very close, hard-fought election as a united Labour Party led by first ever female Prime Minister.
What would you say to Julia if she could be watching now? What would you say to her?
Oh, what would I say? Well, we love you, dear. We look. I really don't know. We would have been overwhelmed, and when I see Julia, we'll both cuddle and probably have a tear or two. And but the battle in front of us is enormous, and the outcome is problematic. So, but I feel confident that we will emerge victorious at the end of the day.
Did you think you would see a female Prime Minister?
Sorry?
Did you think you would see a female Prime Minister?
I would never have thought that. You know, it's just been leading your busy daily life and dealing with all these issues as they arise. But I knew Julia would be a performer that would be a participant in the political arena, that she would be formidable, and she'd certainly rise. Now, I never anticipated she'd rise to the ultimate position of being Prime Minister, but there we are. That's what's happened.
Well, that was Julia Gillard's mum and dad there. That was before the ballot. Clearly an emotional day for them, and they would be overjoyed now to see their daughter become Prime Minister, become Australia's first female Prime Minister. What a day for the Gillard family. Simply extraordinary. And, you know, as difficult as this is for the Labor Party, and we can talk about Kevin Rudd and what went wrong and all of that, this, of course, is momentous. Julia Gillard really has emerged from the pack over the last 4 or 5 years to become Prime Minister. It was, unthinkable even a day or two ago that this week would finish this way. But there you go. She's become Australia's new Prime Minister, and what a day for her and her family to celebrate. Now, I need to correct something we were saying earlier about the House of Representatives. We were saying it's been suspended, that Anthony Albanese had suspended the House. That's not the case. The House is still sitting. We apologise for this. It's all live TV. We get different reports coming through. What you saw him saying earlier was that they're suspending the adjournment debate. The House is still sitting. And they'll get back to the adjournment debate later. But just to clear up that confusion, the House of Reps is still sitting. You can still watch it on APAC, of course. Now, inside the caucus meeting, what exactly happened? Well, Labor MP Belinda Neal is bowing out this election. She's leaving politics, having lost pre-selection, but she gave a fairly candid account of what went on behind closed doors in the caucus meeting. Have a look.
We're all saddened by the circumstances, but of course it's a new beginning. We had a caucus meeting where Kevin Rudd very bravely came out and talked a lot about the achievements of the government, but ultimately said that in the interest of the Australian people and of the Australian Labor Party, that he would stand down and make way for Julia Gillard. So a mixture of sadness but pride and excitement, because it can be a new opportunity to explain the policies of the government and of the Labor Party to the Australian community in a situation where that direction seemed to have been lost.
How do you feel personally, I mean, given your time in Parliament, and perhaps some might say checkered history with Kevin Rudd, how do you feel about him now no longer being there and Julia being there?
I think circumstances like this are always sad for everybody. I think I was very proud of Kevin that he was able to stand down with such dignity, and that ultimately he took the decision that was in the interest of the party, not necessarily himself personally. It's a new opportunity. Julia is committed to lead the party, to communicate strongly with the Australian community, and I think she'll do that. But I think in those circumstances, many people, the situation is somewhat sad, but I think also exciting. The first woman PM, someone who obviously has a lot of energy and intellect and commitment. I think it looks very positive for us.
Will this damage or enhance your chances of winning the next election?
Look, you never really can say that exactly, but of course I would expect that it'll be an opportunity for us to restate the message, clarify some of the policy directions of the government that have got lost. So I think really it should improve our likelihood of being returned after the next election.
Well, it might increase Labor's likelihood of being returned, but perhaps not Belinda Neal. Talking there about this change in leader and change in Prime Minister. Of course, so many have been watching this unfolding event from the sidelines. Interested parties. Ashley Gillen's been speaking to some of them in the courtyard of Parliament House. There, Ash, you've got Tim Costello there as well. What does he think of all this?
Yes, look, the Chief of World Vision, of course, Tim Costello, has worked very closely with Kevin Rudd on a number of projects while he has been Prime Minister. And, of course, you've been a keen observer of politics for many years now, following, obviously, your brother Peter Costello and his career as well. You spoke to Kevin Rudd yesterday morning. Do you think he was expecting this?
No, he texted me. And, look, I think he was a man of great vision when it came to aid and the world's poor. He committed to lifting Australia's aid to 0.5, 50 cents in every $100. And that took courage because, as Nixon said, there ain't no votes in aid. So I'm very sad about how quick it was and how brutal politics is. And, of course, I've seen that with a member of my family. I also think it's fantastic that Julia Gillard, a woman, ascends the throne. A Welsh Labor politician, I guess the throwback in some ways to old-time Labor politics with Billy Hughes and other Welsh leaders. But really exciting, it's a woman, and she, like Kevin, I think has the same passion about equality and fairness in this society and for the world.
Of course, Julia Gillard has a lot of decisions to make now about policy issues. Key among those, Labor's policy on climate change and asylum seekers. Would you hope for a change in direction there?
Yeah, look, on both issues, we in Australia can do better. We, of all developed nations, are the most impacted by climate change, and yet we're almost going to be the last to get there to put a price on carbon. And that's embarrassing. It's already costing lives and livelihoods where World Vision works. Malaria in countries where there were no mosquitoes, even in the highlands of New Guinea, where it was too cool for mosquitoes. So climate change is urgent for the world's poor and for Australia. Look, on asylum seekers, we really have to get perspective. An island continent, natural barrier for thousands who might stream into Europe or America. We don't have that problem. A few boats, yes, it's a few more, but we should not be becoming hysterical. And I hope Julia Gillard holds the line on that.
Tim Costello, thanks for your time.
A pleasure.
David, we'll be back to you when we can nab some more people just wandering through the Senate courtyard.
Good on you, Ash. Look, thanks for that. And Tim Costello there, not wanting to speak ill of the dead at all, giving Kevin Rudd a rap there for what he's done on overseas aid. Of course, he did achieve a lot more than just that. But it's those policy problems that clearly Tim Costello and others have on climate change, on asylum seekers, and those in the Labor caucus in the end deciding that they needed a change of direction on a couple of these issues to win back some of that support they had only a year ago or less amongst voters that really has slipped away and brought about this extraordinary outcome where Kevin Rudd's been tipped out by his party, deciding at the last minute not to contest, for Julia Gillard to take over unchallenged. Peter Van Onselen and Kieran Gilbert and Graham Morris are there in our Canberra studio as well. The dust settling on this in half an hour, about 40 minutes. Julia Gillard will hold a news conference to talk about... OK, I just got a message here, sorry. Wayne Swan will be going to the G20 meeting on behalf of the Australian government. So Treasurer Wayne Swan will take that flight tomorrow that Kevin Rudd was going to take and attend the G20 summit in the place of the Prime Minister. Julia Gillard will not be going to Toronto for the G20 meeting. She'll be staying here and working out where the furniture goes in the lodge.
David,
no
further to your news earlier that Julia Gillard's holding a news conference at 11. At midday, we're hearing she will be sworn in at Government House Yarralumla as the next Prime Minister of Australia, as well as Wayne Swan sworn in as Deputy PM. So it seems, Dave, they're going to be doing that, the executive first, and then she'll have a day, possibly a few days, to sort out the rest of the front bench.
Kieran, we know that Wayne Swan will remain Treasurer. He'll become Deputy Prime Minister as well. Let's speculate a little, if we can, about what happens to the rest of the ministry here. Leaders like to say there's no payback after these sorts of things, but there always is some reshaping, some reforming. And we'll cast it around the table there. What do you think are some of the changes that might happen as a result of this change to the Labor ministry?
Well, you'd expect that Bill Shorten will be promoted to the ministry. He was the architect of this coup, the one that began the push of the Labor right in Victoria, ironically installing someone of the Labor left in Victoria as Prime Minister. So that's one thing I think we can fairly much bet on. Mark Arbib will probably move to the ministry as well. He and Julia Gillard have worked closely together in the employment.
He's in the
to the cabinet, I should say. Yeah. To the inner ministry. Pete, what else can we expect?
I think those sort of moves are likely, but not necessarily this side of the election. They're probably more likely than not this side of the election, but there will be some consideration being put in relation to what Graham was saying before, that Gillard won't want to be seen as beholden to the factions or to the unions for that matter, and promoting the key power brokers that actually orchestrated this coup, and let's be honest, that's what it was. Promoting them now is perhaps an image problem for her. Now, Bill Shorten is a savvy politician. He's going to be in politics for a long time, and he wants this party to win the next election. He and some of the other power brokers may decide that, yes, we're ripe for promotion, but let's do it post the election in an inevitable reshuffle, rather than have people taking on ministries this close to an election where they could fumble because they're not across the policy details. So that's just my view. We'll see what happens, whether they follow that script. But one way or the other, the long term of a Gillard Prime Ministership, if she gets a long term, there will be some pretty enormous changes, I think, to the nature of the ministry, and also, I think, enormous changes to the way the ministry is selected, because, it was pretty well known that Kevin Rudd altered the structure where he got to choose his own ministry, where normally that's done by the factional warlords.
We talked about this last night. This really rang through from critics of Kevin Rudd, this change to having the leader choose the front bench. While it sounds good, for voters to get rid of the faceless men choosing the front bench and have the leader given that authority, in practice, it turned out to be that many found they just simply were too scared to give him bad news, Peter, because Kevin Rudd held their fate in his hands and could punish them with demotion because he had that power. Not that he wielded it or exercised it really in terms of demoting people often, but that was the fear, and people do want to see a return, it seems to me, to having caucus choose the front bench.
I think that's right, David. I mean, it's interesting. The conventional wisdom seems to be that it's good to have the leader choose the front bench, because at least then it's not so-called faceless men that are doing it for him or now her. That's the conventional wisdom. That's certainly the attack line that has always been run by the Liberal Party, that's the way they do it, whereas the Labor Party have these faceless so-called men. I actually take a different view. I think that the great strength of the Labor Party has always been the fact that it is a force for unity after the factional warlords can impose discipline. When you remove that, you have a situation like what we've had in the last 24 hours. Gillard would, at one level, internally welcome that discipline, even if externally, as Graham Morris has said, she needs to not look like she's somehow beholden to them.
David, I think one of the things that the new Prime Minister should be doing, the first thing she should do, is to go to Kevin Rudd and say, Kevin, how do you feel? Would you like the post of Foreign Affairs? Now, he will probably say, no, I need to sit on the backbench for a while and think about what I'm going to do. But it would be a healing thing. There's no doubt he'd do Foreign Affairs extremely well. And the other two, I think, if she's serious about starting afresh on the environment, I think Penny Wong and Peter Garrett will probably be in trouble. I think they do need a couple of new faces there to start again. They have not been able to negotiate their way through these things. But I still think the big one is to say thank you to Kevin Rudd, because he has played the game well this morning on behalf of the Labor Party, and he is entitled to be offered a very senior job. It should be Foreign Affairs, and he probably will say thanks, but no thanks.
Well, another interesting one. Sorry, David, if you've got the chance. Another interesting one is the possibility of what happens to someone like Craig Emerson. Now, Craig Emerson used to be in the AWU. He voted the wrong way from what it wanted in a leadership showdown, I believe, with Mark Latham, and he's no longer in the AWU. Now, Kevin Rudd gave him a lifeline when he became leader. He brought him back onto the front bench. He's a very talented minister. He does a lot of media, but he's also talented on policy. Now, he is someone who could be in some trouble from the factional warlords now that he doesn't have the protection of Kevin Rudd, unless Julia Gillard makes a call to protect him as well because she sees him as a talent. I think from a PR perspective, it's quite important that Labor doesn't lose people like him who are well qualified simply because he hasn't played the factional game in the past.
And David, the other person that I'll just throw into that before we just cross back to you is Greg Combet. If Bill Shorten is the man behind this, he was the key architect of this coup, where does that leave Greg Combet? I did see him walking back with Chris Evans, who we know was backing Kevin Rudd ahead of this vote. So if, again, another talent was on the wrong side of this, according to the factions. Who knows where Combet ends up? He might have... it's going to be interesting to see how Gillard balances all this out moving forward.
I think, Peter, you're right, that Craig Emerson is a real talent there that should be protected. Greg Combet, look, I, to be honest, didn't hear over the last 24 hours which way he was going on this leadership contest between Gillard and Rudd. I think he's kept a fairly low profile and certainly wasn't one pushing numbers one way or the other as an active player in this. But look, clearly he is a rising star for Labor as well, and you know, in any sensible reshuffle will be promoted. You know, beyond the outer ministry, he clearly is cabinet material and has been given tasks, particularly cleaning up the mess of insulation, trying to negotiate an outcome on the ETS, tasks well above his post. Speak of the man, there he is now. But with, as you say, Doug Cameron, who, as we heard this morning, was firmly carrying the torch for Kevin Rudd, as a number of MPs did. This was the problem with Kevin Rudd saying last night that he wanted to contest the leadership, that you had so many MPs out there saying why they wanted him to stay and not Julia Gillard.
I'm hearing, we just got a text message saying Combet was a Gillard supporter. I don't know if that's, you know, hindsight, but that's what the message. That's what the message says from Labor Insider.
Can I jump in here? I mean, the reason I really think that it would be smart for Gillard not to do a major front bench reshuffle this side of the election, apart from just the fact that the current ministers understand their portfolios, is that the victors in this, who know that they're going to get promotion at some point as long as they can make sure that the party wins, the victors are going to be prepared to play ball and be disciplined. If she reshuffles now and there are half a dozen losers that are dumped out of the ministry, that's half a dozen people potentially backgrounding, discontent. I just don't think that would be a smart play. I think it would be the wrong play for the victors to try to claim the spoils now. They need to try to win the election. That's the real spoils of victory. If they do that, well, then there's plenty of time after that for Gillard to shape the team any which way she likes or her backers like.
Can I ask Graham Morris a question about what happens with the staff here? Because this is important too. These aren't the people in the public eye, you know, the ministers that we're talking about now, but the staff are pivotal to how an office works, how a leader's office works. But, you know, you change leader, they bring in their own chief of staff normally. But what do you think? Do you need to keep, in a situation like this, Graham, some of those key figures there in the Prime Minister's office?
Very few survive. Look, there'll be a lot of tears in the office at the moment. Some would hope, because of their income and their family mortgage commitments and everything, to be offered a job, but very few do. And they are so flat with their boss being knocked off that they're a bit useless for the next 3 months anyway. So, you know, I think in Parliament House people have become a lot better at trying to find jobs for the staffers whose bosses bite the dust, but there's still a lot of people who fall through the cracks and they struggle.
And look, there's a lot of the criticism, Graham, about Kevin Rudd's management style. And well, in fact, let's ask Peter about this, because Peter, you wrote the piece a week ago that that I'm talking about in the Australian about the office of Kevin Rudd, about the young guns, Alistair Jordan, his Chief of Staff, Lockie Harris, Press Secretary, Andrew Charlton, his Economics Advisor, all about 3031. He was taking advice from this collective, this group of young guys. But look, they are talented guys, there's no doubt about it.
Absolutely.
And people like Alistair Jordan, Lockie and Andrew Charlton clearly have big careers ahead of them. What happens to them now, do you think? Should they be picked up by Julia Gillard? Would they want to be picked up by Julia Gillard? What happens to them?
Look, I don't think there is any prospect of them being picked up. And yes, they are talented, but I think their talents, at least in the short to medium term, are going to get exhibited outside of Parliament House, outside of the Labor political realm. Lachlan Harris was moving on anyway. He comes from a family that has a very strong family business, and I suspect he will move into that with the enormous experience, a lot of which was successful, we should remember, in managing the media.
He's probably already on his way to the Greek islands as we speak.
He probably is. So he'll be fine, and he was leaving after this election anyway. Beyond that, Alistair Jordan is widely liked. Perhaps other than the leak from yesterday, he's widely liked in Labor circles, but he's very close to Kevin Rudd. Now, Kevin Rudd, if he's going to look after anyone in the aftermath of this by trying to help them into a job outside of politics, Alistair Jordan is the man, but he can probably do that himself anyway. He is, after all, now the former Chief of Staff to a Prime Minister. Yep. Andrew Charlton's an interesting one. Very talented Rhodes Scholar he was, doctor, economic advisor who morphed into a political advisor. His problem, though, internally of the party is that there was a perception that he was a talented intellect who was sort of advising politics, which wasn't his realm. He wasn't a creature of the Labor Party. So he, I think, will move back into private practice and do so very successfully. But the long and the short of that is that it's three guys that were essentially the gang of three. We talk about the gang of four amongst the ministers. That gang of three in the office were Kevin Rudd's close confidants, and I would be staggered, frankly, if any of the three of them continued to advise any Labor MP, particularly the Prime Minister, the new Prime Minister, Julia Gillard.
Just as the dust settles here, need to clarify a few things. Chris Evans was not supporting Kevin Rudd, as I'm sure one of us might have said earlier in the coverage. We're just getting a few people sending messages through to correct the record now that the dust is settling and pointing out who they backed.
I don't think anyone supported Kevin Rudd now, did they, Dan?
It was 112, 112 for Gillard, or we should say 111, because Kevin Rudd presumably did.
Yeah, that's right. Look, the staff, difficult for them, as Graham says, not an easy day. But those young guys in particular, I'm sure, will go on to stellar careers wherever it may be. But Julia Gillard, in about 25 minutes from now, will be holding a news conference, her first news conference as Prime Minister designate, shall we call it. She is going to be sworn in after that at about 12:30 at Government House by the Governor-General, where she will formally become Prime Minister. But she will be having to tell us in this news conference coming up shortly, you'll watch it here live on Sky News, exactly what she intends to do on perhaps not the ministry. I think she'll wait and tell us that another day and take her time to sort that out. But she does have to give us some policy direction here on the mining tax, on the emissions trading scheme, on asylum seekers. She may well say all things are up for grabs. We're going to have a good look and tell you soon what we're going to do on these things, but I'm not sure if that will cut it. Kieran, do you think she does need to give a bit more certainty, a bit more clarity about these policy problems for Labor at the moment?
You know, David, my guess is that she'll do it very, very quickly. I wouldn't even be surprised if she starts this news conference, starts off her time as Prime Minister with an announcement on the mining tax to put that one to bed. It's been a thorn in the side of the government. They haven't been able to get any other message out. And as I said earlier in the day, you know, you only get one first impression. Why not come out consultative, say we're going to compromise, use that word for a change, because the government hasn't really used it too much when it comes to this issue. And it's one thing that they can give some ground. I think they had a lot of leeway in that proposal. You know, the long-term bond rate is just, by most people's estimation, not a super profit. So, you know, they can lift that the uplift rate where the tax kicks in. I think they could do it almost immediately. And the fact is, Gillard is closer to Swan these days than they obviously had been previously, and he's now also the Deputy Prime Minister.
Kieran, I'm going to be fascinated to see how much does Kevin Rudd let the Labor Party dump on him where they think they need to politically to be able to get themselves to an election-winning position for this next election. They will want to be able to dump some of the baggage on him. If they do it nicely, maybe he's going to allow that. Maybe he's not. That, I think, is going to be so important to how successful Gillard is. Can they lay things at his feet that she may well have been involved in, but he is willing to cop as his call as the Prime Minister, and therefore allow her to help freshen things up?
I think what we will get as well, I mean, it's going to be tricky balancing that out, but I think as we look forward to this news conference in about just over 20 minutes from now, I think we can anticipate a very clear signal on what they're going to do on the emissions trading scheme. I agree with you. I don't think they're going to be able to reintroduce it, Graham, like you said earlier, if for no other I mean, they might, but I don't think they'll be able to go that far, because if they do, they put in jeopardy that commitment to have the budget back in surplus by 2012. Because you bring the emissions trading scheme back in, it has all of the parallel costs with it.
Yeah, look, it wouldn't surprise me at all if she wants to be really melodramatic, that she says we're going to have a double dissolution on the emissions trading scheme. Now, that would set the cat among the pigeons. It would give the opposition an enormous stick with which to beat her with, but it also holds true. It would mean she's holding true to one of the key planks that got the Labor Party into government. Now, that would be quite dramatic, but, geez, it'd take a big backbone.
Well, I'll tell you what, if there is a double dissolution called by Julia Gillard, someone who, of course, will be watching very keenly, talking to Ashley Gillen now. She's been talking to various players around Parliament as all of this unfolds. Ash, you've got Steve Fielding there.
I do. The Senator is here with me now. We've just been discussing how we're almost waiting for someone to pinch us and wake us up, because this has happened so quickly, and the Labor staffers and politicians I've been running into down here are really walking around in a bit of a daze. Steve Fielding, what do you think led to Kevin Rudd's downfall, and what should be Julia Gillard's priority?
Look, it was clearly Rudd's leadership style that has led to his demise. Quite clearly it was non-consultative, and I think that the super mining profits tax showed that lack of consultation. The caucus have got jack of it. I think most Australians can see through the spin and the lack of substance of running a government, and this has led to his demise. It really is a leadership issue. It was a leadership style that was non-consultative, and clearly it wasn't going to last, and that's brought the Prime Minister down.
I spoke with Nick Xenophon earlier. He said he'd only had a couple of meetings with the Prime Minister over the last nearly 3 years. Did you experience the same sort of thing, and are you hoping that Julia Gillard will be more open to speaking with crossbenchers like yourself?
Look, that's the case. Look, the Prime Minister was not consultative. His office wouldn't return phone calls. And I think if most Australians knew that, they would be shocked to know that the Prime Minister's office wouldn't even return phone calls. It's pretty bad. And look, Julia Gillard is more consultative. I work very closely with her on the industrial relations legislation, and we worked very hard and together, consultative, and there was a good result for everybody. Julia Gillard is a lot more consultative, and this is about leadership style, and has seen the demise of a Prime Minister very, very rapidly.
Steve Fielding, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
David, back to you.
Ashley, well, there you go. She's got one fan already in the Senate. Perhaps life might be a bit easier, but look, the reality is, whether it's an unlikely double dissolution or a more likely general election, it is, in whichever way it goes, it's going to be the Greens holding the balance of power in the upper house. That's what the expectation is. But look, who knows what the new Parliament will look like? Who knows what the election outcome will be, and who knows when the election will be? All of this, I'm sure, Julia Gillard will be peppered with questions at this news conference coming up in about 20 minutes from now. I don't expect she will be giving too many answers, but Kieran, I thought you had some good advice there about you need to get this done quickly. If this drags, the questions about what to do on mining, what to do on climate change and what to do on asylum seekers, without much of an indication from the new Prime Minister, that's a difficult start to the job.
Yeah, I think particularly on the first two, I think on asylum seekers the room to move is minimal. In that regard, my expectation is that what she will be under pressure to do is to just take them on a bit more. That is the opposition when it comes to the ground that they've made on that, I mean, it's tough because there've been 130 odd votes this year. It's not an easy one to confront, but you don't, I think, confront it by vacating the field, which of course a number of the Labor backbench and indeed some of the front bench felt that Kevin Rudd did on that issue.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Look, I do need to make a point here as well. We talked about the blokes, we're talking about the staff in the Prime Minister's office, what happens to them now and the young guns there. But of course, more than just those three, and many women in there as well too. We should give them a shout out for the great work that they did too in Kevin Rudd's office. For so many, this is a difficult day and an uncertain future as to what happens now with their jobs. I want to get some thoughts too from Mark Kenny from the Adelaide Advertiser, who's been across this story all morning as well. He's now with Ashley Gillard.
Mark Kenny, of course, political editor at the Adelaide Advertiser. What are you making of all this morning? We're counting down to Julia Gillard's news conference now. What are you expecting her to say when she walks into that room?
Well, it will be interesting to see what she has to say because there's a lot of hope amongst Labor faithful that she's going to do something to steady the ship. They've obviously got this running sore of the mining super profits tax. They've got the asylum seeker issue, which Kevin Rudd himself identified last night when he was talking about seeing off this challenge. And they're really looking for her to do something that gives them some hope that she can find a way back out of the sort of poll dramas that they're experiencing at the moment. It's quite a challenge.
It's all happened so quickly, it's hard to digest, but just looking back on the last 24 hours, what do you see as the catalyst behind Kevin Rudd's downfall?
Well, look, it's really quite remarkable how quickly this has happened. At 6 o'clock last night, there was almost nothing happening, and what was happening was it was happening amongst only a couple of people. And there were backbenchers and even one minister I spoke to last night after this had even come onto the ABC News that knew nothing about it. And within no time at all, it just sort of exploded into this crisis. And, you know, what do we have 12 hours later? We've got a new Prime Minister. This is probably the most remarkable day that's ever happened in Australian politics.
One of the big decisions Julia Gillard's going to have to make is about election timing. Are you willing to hazard a guess as to if she'll go pretty soon, quite early, while she's got the wow factor going?
Look, I think she probably will, but I don't think she'll go for the immediate snap poll. I mean, there is one school of thought that she could literally, accept the commission and then just decide that's it, we're going to a poll. I mean, you may recall that Bob Hawke in 1983 became opposition leader on the same day the election was called and then went on to win that election. But that was called by Malcolm Fraser, of course, at the time. I think it's probably unlikely that she would do that. I think she'll probably get around the country, as I heard someone saying earlier, and just test the water a bit and start communicating the key messages of her new government and then pull on the election. But I wouldn't think it'd be too far away.
A lot of people right now are probably asking who is Julia Gillard and what sort of Prime Minister is she going to make. The one thing we know is that she will be a very different Prime Minister to Kevin Rudd, and it will be fascinating to see how her ministry lineup goes and if she gives a lot more sway to the unions in the decisions she makes.
Yes, it will be interesting. You say that she'll be very different. She will be certainly different in her style, and I think a lot of people will be looking for a more direct communication style than Kevin Rudd was able to achieve, and they'll be looking to see things like the mining tax dealt with very quickly so that she can get back to communicating the government's strengths. And it does have a good story to tell about the way it's steered around the GFC and has a good story to tell in a range of areas, health and education and so forth, and that's what she'll be looking to do. But she is, to a large extent, also locked into many of the decisions the government's made so far. So there's a limit to how far she can step away from the government to this point, and that's really going to be the challenge, a balancing act. In some ways it is a marketing difference, but there will be some, I would think, substantive changes as well.
And how do you think Tony Abbott will go squaring off against Julia Gillard? We've seen the two, they're old sparring partners. They turn up every Friday morning on a breakfast TV show up against each other. How do you think he'll handle her as Prime Minister?
I think that potentially this is going to be quite difficult for him. He hasn't really performed all that well in those Friday morning appearances. He tends to look a bit off balance, and Julia Gillard seems to handle him okay. Now, she's a very proven parliamentary performer. She's arguably the best parliamentary performer at the moment operating. So, her runs are on the board. Tony Abbott's been an extremely impressive opposition leader. Whether he can then translate that to being a viable alternative Prime Minister remains to be seen. But he certainly has knocked Kevin Rudd off his equilibrium, and we've seen how that's ended. But I would think that at this stage, the money would be on Gillard prevailing over Tony Abbott.
Mark Kenny, thanks for your time.
My pleasure.
And we are, of course, counting down to that Julia Gillard news conference coming up very soon now, David, and of course we'll be live to that when it happens.
Yeah, about 15 minutes away. Thanks, Ash. Look,